Good good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and we want to welcome back to another session on my Declassified Caribbean News and Network channel. Thank you so much for joining. Now, when people think about the Caribbean, they often imagine beautiful beaches, vibrant music, and rich cultures. But beneath that image lies a social structure shaped over centuries by slavery, capitalism, race, and wealth. Is the Caribbean truly a classless society? Or does an unwritten caste system still influence who holds power, who has opportunities, and who gets the last or who gets left behind? This afternoon, we'll explore how history continues to shape the present, from Haiti and the Dominican Republic to Jamaica, Trinidad, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and beyond. We'll separate myth from reality, examine the evidence, and invite a respectful conversation about one of the Caribbean's most important and least discussed issues. We're tackling one of the most uncomfortable and least discussed realities in Caribbean society, the hidden caste system that continues to shape our politics, economies, social relationships, and opportunities. While the Caribbean often celebrates itself as a region built on diversity, multiculturalism, and racial mixing, beneath that image lies a complex hierarchy of race, color, class, and privilege that many people experience every day. From Jamaica to Trinidad to Haiti and to Barbados, Guyana to the Dominican Republic, the legacy of colonialism did not disappear when slavery ended and when independence was achieved. Instead, many of the structures that concentrated wealth, power, and influence in the hands of a small elite survived and adapted. In many cases, lighter skin, foreign connections, inherited wealth, prestigious surnames, and access to elite institutions continue to provide advantages that are often invisible to those who benefit from them. The Caribbean rarely speaks openly about caste. We talk about class, we talk about education, we talk about economic access or economic success. Yet behind these discussions often lies a deeper reality, the enduring relationship between race, color, and power. Why do certain groups dominate business sectors? Why do some communities remain trapped in cycles of poverty generation after generation? And why do political and economic elites often emerge from the same social circles, schools, and families? These questions are not about assigning blame to individuals. They are about understanding systems. They are about examining how history continues to shape the present and how colonial era hierarchies may still influence who gets access to opportunity and who gets heard, who gets represented, and who gets left behind. This evening, we will explore the historical roots of these social divisions, the role of race and colorism in Caribbean societies, the connection between economic power and social status, and whether the region has truly moved beyond the social and economic inequities inherited from slavery, colonialism, and plantation society. We will also ask a difficult but necessary question. Can the Caribbean build genuinely inclusive societies if it refuses to confront the hidden hierarchies that continues to influence everyday life? This promises to be a thoughtful and challenging conversation. Whether you agree or disagree with the premise, we invite you to engage respectfully, share your experiences, and help us examine one of the most important yet least understood issues facing the Caribbean today. Welcome to another live, and we hope that you will join us and you're ready now to communicate and to participate in this very important live. Now, before we get into our chat, you have not yet greeted me, so we'll just begin with the video and look at some issues, affecting classism and racism in the Caribbean territories. So I'm going to open up with this lady here, and she always gives very thoughtful, videos. She makes thoughtful videos on TikTok, and she mentioned this about the history of the Caribbean, which I think would be great to start off our discussion for this afternoon. So let me put her up on the screen. So this is here, and I'm going to put it on the screen. the screen, and we're listen to it. Please listen to her, and then we are going to discuss some of the issues that she is actually talking about. So let me add her to the stage, and then we will. I'm going to turn up the volume now, and then yes, she's almost there. All right. So I'm going to turn up the volume, and then we can discuss what she is talking about in the video.
The Atlantic and forced into sugarcane fields with whips at their backs. It was one of the most brutal slave economies.
Let me go back. Let me start from the beginning. Okay, so let me go back from the beginning.
People love to say, well, if it was so bad after slavery, why didn't y'all?
What's going on here?
People love to act like the Caribbean is just beaches and accents. They think that if you're from Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Haiti, or St. Lucia, you're somehow separate from Black Americans, from African blood, from global resistance. But let's be clear, the Caribbean isn't a birthplace. It's a landing point, a deposit box for the displaced. The Caribbean diaspora is a result of theft, of people stolen from West Africa and dragged across the Atlantic and forced into sugarcane fields with whips at their backs. It was one of the most brutal slave economies in the world, and Europeans made damn sure of that. The British, French, Spanish, and Dutch, they didn't just colonize the islands. They turned them into death machines. Jamaica had more uprisings than any other colony under British rule. Haiti, the first Black republic, had to fight for its freedom and then get punished for 200 years after. Barbados had slave codes so vicious, they literally became the blueprint for American chattel slavery. So when people try to act like the Caribbean people had it easier, or they aren't the same as us, miss me with that. We're cousins, not competitors. And we're all born from the same fire. And the diaspora isn't just about being scattered. It's about what we built once they tried to break us. Caribbean folks shaped Harlem, Brixton, Toronto, Panama, and Belize. We spread language, culture, rhythm, and rebellion everywhere we landed. From Garvey to Marley, from Claudia Jones to Shirley Chisholm. We didn't just survive the Middle Passage. We rewrote what survival could look like. So yeah, the diaspora is real. It's fragmented, complicated, painful. But it's also brilliant, it's resilient, and it's interconnected. Whether you're from Kingston or Crown Heights, Port-au-Prince or South London, you're the descendant of people who refused to stay buried. And every step you take is an answer to that legacy. We're not lost. We're everywhere.
Very good. So this is a very beautiful, I think that could kickstart our conversation about race and class, because a lot of times we think the Caribbean countries are just a bunch of islands and people are running around and going to the beaches, right? But what she's suggesting here is that the Caribbean, nation states are built up of different races, of different ethnicities, of different classes of people. Right, and that we have a big diaspora, whether in London, in Canada, in New York. Right, the Caribbean has always helped the entire world to come together, and we have fought tooth and nail for liberty. And I think that that's what she is telling the people, that we are just more than beaches. Many people think that we're just beaches and people just are there. Some people don't even know we have schools. Some of them think that we're living in huts, right? And we are the ones who have to educate them, to let them know that the Caribbean is also a complex, or they're complex societies as any metropolitan state in the world, whether it be Canada or, the US, wherever. Now, let us look at another video on Trinidad, which is considered to be the most diverse of the British-speaking Caribbean territories. We're going to look at that video and see what this narrator, this producer, is suggesting about race and class in Trinidad. So bear me as the video comes up. Before I go to Trinidad, let's look at the pyramid of racism in the colonies, in the Caribbean territory. So please bear with me as I put these things on the screen. Okay, so we have, let me share my screen here. And we are going to go to that video, or to those videos, and share them with you so that we can kickstart our discussion. Is it here? I think this was one that I wanted to put up on the screen. Exploring. Sometimes, okay, let me take her off the screen. Get the one here. Might just Trinidad. We might just go to Trinidad, the race in Trinidad, right? Trinidad diversity. Let's go there. So let's go to Trinidad first, and then, because Trinidad is known as the one of, if not the most diverse in the Caribbean region in terms of class and so let's get there. Let me get it on the screen. It's coming on the screen, so just be patient with me here. All right, so we have, it should be, is it there now? No, not yet. Add to the stage. Okay, good. Oh, where is it? Add to the stage. I thought I added it to the stage. Okay, good. All right, so let me turn up the volume now so that you can hear it. What's happening there? Can you hear, are you hearing, guys? Why did it stop? Yeah, why did it stop? All right, let me replay it again because it's something is happening here. So let me see if I can get it to be replayed so that you can listen to it. Okay, good. All right, so let's and I'm going to ask you again to listen to another one that was talking about Trinidad now, diversity, racial diversity, and in Trinidad. So let me share that screen. Let me share my screen with you again, and we're going to look at the diversity, and then we're going to come and talk about what was discussed in these videos because we have to look at the history, and then we can delve into what is happening at the present moment, right? So let me get this on the screen. The racial diversity in Trinidad and Tobago. So let me get that on the screen. Quite an interesting video that was posted here on TikTok. So let me get it.
In Portugal and Syria.
It.
Every single group left their mark. That's why in Trinidad you can eat doubles for breakfast, Chinese food for lunch, and palau for dinner. That's why we have Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and Orisha worshippers living on the same street. That's why Carnival exists. It's literally every culture on that island exploding into one giant celebration. Trinidad didn't become diverse by accident. It became diverse through colonization, slavery, and survival. Follow me because Caribbean history hits different.
I'll replay
We're
it
just
because it
scratching the
was,
surface.
yeah, let me replay
Drop
it.
your flag if you're repping the islands. Trinidad is one of the most diverse countries on the planet, and there's a very dark reason why. It started with the Spanish, who colonized the island and wiped out the indigenous Amerindian population almost completely. Then came the French, who brought enslaved Africans to work the sugar plantations. Then the British took over, and when slavery ended, they shipped in indentured workers from India, China, and even Portugal and Syria. Every single group left their mark. That's why in Trinidad you can eat doubles for breakfast, Chinese food for lunch, and palau for dinner. That's why we have Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and Orisha worshippers living on the same street. That's why Carnival exists. It's literally every culture on that island exploding into one giant celebration. Trinidad didn't become diverse by accident. It became diverse through colonization, slavery, and survival. Follow me because
Great video. Okay, so let's look. We are the world, right? I mean, whether you're talking about Trinidad or you're talking about Barbados or you're talking about all of the Caribbean islands, we are the world. We are representative of all parts of all continents of the globe, right? So what we have is a system where we have inherited a legacy of slavery and colonialism that has helped to divide us by race and class and color. But it is something that is often not easily spoken about in the Caribbean because to some extent we enjoy some amount of peace in the region. It's not like we're getting up every day and we're cursing out each other or we're fighting and we're killing because of somebody's racial makeup. We know that that happened in South Africa and in many other countries, including in India. Even today we still have these color prejudices and people still war and fight and can be violent in some cases. So I think that we take it for granted that to some extent we have some amount of peace, right? And we live cohesively to some extent. However, there are problems, right? It should not, negate the fact that we have some severe problems with race and class in the Caribbean. Because I think what has happened, this sort of cohesiveness has prompted us to think that it doesn't exist and that we are a racial democracy, as many people say in Brazil. But are we really a racial democracy, or do we still have problems with the way how we look and the opportunities that people get according to their race or to their ethnic background? And I want to hear from you. Thank you. Let me hear some of the things you have to say. Good evening, Professor and the Caribbean family. I'll be back here in 5 minutes. Thank you, Marie. Hello. And then we have Alexis. Welcome to the live. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is well. Yes, thank you so much. And we have WHZ saying, I was home recently and it's either the Venezuelan invasion is real or the hidden elite are showing their faces in broad daylight. That's an interesting thought. I think that they are. I think both are true. And then we have here WHZ saying again, the buffer classes carefully placed post-independence elite are re-emerging throughout the Caribbean. Now, what has happened is really that they've already been, they were already always here, I should say. All right, we have the buffering class, the white elites, right, have always been the ones to control. Then most of them left the Caribbean after independence, right? Most of the white people, they went back to England or wherever they were from after independence, and they left the brown class, of course. And then you have, in the case of Trinidad, you have, distinctive classes like the Indian and other things, who are the majority in Trinidad, Indian versus Black. You have the Syrians and other racial minorities there. But the fact of the matter is that the white people have always divided us amongst our racial, component or racial identity. So those who are lighter are going to be closer to the white master, to the colonial masters, and those who are darker will always be at the bottom. But they always tell us that if you educate yourselves, right, and you take you take advantage of the opportunities, then it means therefore that you can transcend all of these colonial, racial, economic barriers. But is that true? Is that true based on what we're seeing? Are we seeing that there are still 21 families, or how many families that control our countries? And when you look into the boardrooms of these families and you look at their family makeup, their color, you are seeing that they are not people who sometimes look like the majority of the population. So we can see that in the Caribbean still, even though we might be, in some cases, in the case of Jamaica and Haiti and Barbados, predominantly Black, as people would say, predominant of African descent, but we understand that the majority of those who are actually wealthy and control the resources are people of different ethnic backgrounds. The lighter they are, the better opportunities that they have, and people of the darker hues tend to remain at the bottom. Now, that is not always true, and that's where they get us. They will say, oh, but look at that person is doing well, and that person is as Black as I am. But it does not mean that that is the rule. Oftentimes, it is the exception. But when you look at the highest levels of the hierarchical structure, the racial hierarchical structure, you see that it is still very white and very light-skinned, and with other racial minorities at the top. So we cannot definitely say that we in the Caribbean are living, oh, we are free and freer than African Americans. To some extent, we are, because we do not have the large numbers of whites living amongst us. So that makes us a little bit better in that case. But also we have to remember that those who replace the white colonial structure, they sometimes are worse than our colonial masters. Then we have WHZ saying the buffer classes, I think I read this already. Good evening. And yes, this is Stephen is saying, and yes, we have some problems that need to be addressed. Now, I saw this very interesting article here about racism in the Caribbean racial formations, that I thought I would share some insights with that article that has been written. Although the concept of racial formation originated and developed principally from the experience of continental America, it still has relevance to Caribbean conditions and context. Briefly defined, the concept refers to a particular political system in which racial considerations are given privileged positions in policy matters and human relationships. In this racially structured political system, a privileged racial section regarded as superior governs over subordinate but numerically significant racial sections regarded as inferior. Within this system, the state becomes a racial state that distributes resources unequally along racial lines, and always to the benefit of the dominant racial section. Some theorists, such as Michael Omi and Howard Winant, regard this race-based inequality in resource distribution as the principal project of the state within the particular racial formation. So we see where the government is also involved in the distribution of wealth according to the racialized system that we have inherited. Okay, now how do we get this system? How do we ameliorate the conditions? How do we begin to say that there is a problem? Because most people in the Caribbean tend to believe that there is not a problem, and we don't have the same problems as you see in Canada, as you see in the US. How is our problem different? Do we have racial problems, or is that we just have ethnic problems, ethnic divisions? Or we can say that we have classism, as many will say. Or is classism a legacy of racism? What would you say? Do you think that the Caribbean societies are racist? And do you think we suffer from racism within the Caribbean dynamic, Caribbean reality? And Antoinette Marie saying, I am of a dark complexion. And that is it. And most of us, when we find ourselves in this situation, we understand that we have to work harder, much harder than the person who is, fairer. And let's be clear, from school in the education system, I can remember when I was in Jamaica, and people who were very light-skinned, that sometimes they got better grades. The teacher would literally give them better grades than what they would give to the dark-skinned person. It was not always very obvious, but when you look at your friend's paper, right, and their academic performance, sometimes you know that you were smarter, right? And you know that you did a better presentation or your paper was better in comparison to your friend who might have been fairer, lighter skinned. But that is what happens in our Caribbean experience. And I've seen it. I remember once I was in college in Jamaica, and there was this very light-skinned girl, and she was in a group with dark skin, what we call dark skin Jamaican fellow, and he was extremely brilliant, right, with writing papers. Now she was not dull either, but he was smarter. And normally the professor would give him the B plus and give her always the A. Now the fact of the matter is that one day when they had a group work and he participated, now the fact of the matter is that the professor gave him an A because he was a part of the group, even though the professor was thinking that because she was a part of the group, that's why the group deserved an A. And that was weird. But normally the professor would give him a B plus and give her the A. But because she was a part of his group this time, even though he was the one who wrote the paper, predominantly the professor gave the group an A. So these are the things that we can see, and I'm sure many of you, when you're attending schools, primary, secondary schools, and up to the university level, you saw where people with, a lighter hue, they tended to have gotten better treatment, better grades, better opportunities, sometimes scholarships that you might not have gotten. So we see, yes, good afternoon, Z, and glad to see you all, and glad to see you too, and welcome to the live. And Alexis is saying, I believe classism and racism go together. Yes, I think we cannot separate the two, right? Because, as I was reading an article also, they spoke about the fact when the Asians came to the Caribbean, particularly in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, that what happened there is that the colonial lords, the colonial masters would give the lighter hue skin, the Asians, the opportunity to have loans, to have bank loans to develop their businesses. So people will ask, why are the Chinese and the Indians and all these people, why do they have their own businesses and they're entrepreneurs and most Black people aren't? And the question is that they got loans. Now, we see the Chinese coming back to the Caribbean, right? And many of them coming today, they're getting lots of subsidies from the government, tax, cuts, and among many other benefits. They get land, prime land, while they're not giving it to local Black people to build. They're not doing that, right? Now, in the 1990s, I remember specifically also, Jamaica had quite a large middle class of Black entrepreneurs, right? And the government, along with the private sector, the 21 families of Jamaica, they worked tooth and nail. They worked hard to eradicate them and to destroy their businesses. And Jamaica took a big, big dip in terms of going back into poverty. So even the government class and people who look like you and I, right, are also participating in that sort of hierarchical structure to suppress Black people from moving forward. We know that if we are not entrepreneurs, then, and we don't own things, then we are going to be left behind. And that is what Marcus Garvey was trying to do in Jamaica and in the United States and around the world, to tell Black people that we have to own. We can't just sit there and be consumers, because if we're always consumers, they are going to control us. When we look at what is happening in the United States of America, for example, Black people are $10 trillion rich in terms of an economy, and yet still they're not moving up in terms of the power structure. They're still at the bottom. Why? Because they have converted us into what? Consumers. And that is what we need now, to move away from being just consumers to want to have businesses and enterprises, so that we can, be attached to the colonial masters and to exercise some form of power. Now, Z is saying that it is practiced social Darwinism in the Caribbean by people who suffer most from that ideology. And I'm happy you're talking about the social Darwinism, because that is true. And we still talk about in the Caribbean your hair texture. We talk about that still. We know that, if you Miss Beauty, for example, all the Miss Worlds and the Miss Universe, right? How many black people are you seeing going? Well, in recent times, I must say Jamaica and probably Trinidad too have sent black ladies to these, pageant shows, and they have done very well. But for the most part, the Miss Beauties are the ones who look more European and Indian, right? And light complexion that have always done very well, right? Because that is our perception of beauty. And even though people they talk otherwise, most of the times, even in Latino societies, when you talk about the moreno or the morena is a black woman, morena, they would say. The morena is for when you want to have some sexual, gratification. She's not the symbol of beauty in terms of, even though she's beautiful, and she should be, but the fact of the matter, in terms of hierarchy, a man in the Latino society, just like Caribbean society, a black man would prefer to have a lighter complected woman, right? A mestizo. And the mestizo is the mixture between the Native American, the Native Indians, the indigenous people, and Black Europe and white Europeans. So we have mestizos, we have the mulattoes, and the mulattoes are the combination between Africans and Europeans. Now, I understand in Trinidad, for example, and those of you who are Trinidad, let me know, how many different racial groups do you have? I know you have the Douglas and because you have so many different types of mixtures in Trinidad and Tobago. Please let me know how many you have. In Brazil, for example, you have about 175 different racial categories in Brazil. Why? Because the white man, the white colonial master, wants to ensure that the black person who have the black hue, they remain at the bottom of the hierarchical structure, right? How many racial groups are in Barbados? I want those of you from Barbados, how many racial categories do you have there in Barbados? Now, these things, virtually all the isms are the children of social Darwinism, and that is true. That is true. And we know that the social Darwinism came from, to most extent, from India. We talk about the caste system, that the Europeans actually refined the Indian caste system. That is how the whole matter of racism came about. Race is a social construct. It's not a natural phenomenon. It is something that the Europeans developed so that they could divide us. And we know we had the Willie Lynch syndrome, and Willie Lynch was actually a colonial master in Jamaica. And when he used the whole matter of colorism, so what he said, in order to win the blacks, you have to divide them, right? If you're going to win the Africans on the plantation, you've got to divide them. And how are you going to divide them? Divide them against their color, right? So you have those of the lighter hue, the mulattoes, then you are going to make them better. And you cannot, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot go to Haiti and the DR and not recognize that you are literally seeing what happened on the plantation, right? Where as you step into Haiti, it's like it's a hell, right? And many people have said that. And when you come to the DR, you think that these people are so progressive, and you're looking and seeing that these people are lighter, right? The same people that, a legacy of slavery, but of course the colonial masters are giving much more to the lighter complected ones, which happen to be in the DR. So these are things we must understand, that we still continue to suffer the legacies of slavery and colonialism. We have here in WHZ saying the Indians were given land and the Chinese loans, correct. But the fact that they were able to get loans, right, would help them to move and to invest in businesses. But I would think that the Indians got some loans too, right? Wouldn't you think so? That the Indians, because the Indians in Trinidad also, I understand that they did go back to school, and they ensured all Indians said to their children that they should become lawyers and doctors, because they were badly treated, I understand, initially when they went there, as many of them were, including in Jamaica. But they said, let's work hard, and they encouraged their children to be, everyone should be a lawyer and a doctor, and they worked hard. So to some extent, we can't just say they got it, and it was easy, and it was that, and it wouldn't be fair to them to say that, because they did put in some hard work. What we're saying here, however, is that for the most part, the colonial masters viewed them much more favorably than they would view the people of darker hue. And so they got more opportunities than the people with darker hue would have gotten. Now, Z saying the process by which banks allocate loans according to class is called redlining, right? Redlining, absolutely. Redlining. Thank you for that expression, ZE. Yes, and that is true. And it's deliberately done. It's deliberately done. It's not done because they think that they have more, confidence in Indians, or they have more confidence in people who are lighter. It is because they want them to occupy the highest seats of power, right? The highest seats of economic and political power. We must understand that. Now, Marie saying, I took my educational opportunities very seriously. Banks in Trinidad are run by obscene racists. My attempts to open a business account are being stymied, although I have not requested any loans. And I would not disbelieve you. I'm sure that's exactly what happens. If you watch Life and Death, and there's another lady, not Life and Death, but there's a lady in Jamaica, I forgot her name, who wrote the book, Too Black to Succeed. Could somebody research that book for me on Google? Too Black to Succeed. I think I should have invited her on this program. I don't have her email though. Too Black to Succeed. And she wrote how the Jamaican government literally destroyed Black entrepreneurs in Jamaica in 1990s. In fact, there is a Black Jamaican who had to flee the island because the prime minister then, I won't call his name, threatened his life, because he was going to expose the system. He said that I'm not going down until I expose the system. And the prime minister told him that you need to leave or you're going to lose your life. And he had to flee. Now, this was a bankster, a very well sophisticated Jamaican, educated, sophisticated, and knew what he was doing. But because he was winning them by the same dirty games that they were playing, he was winning the game. They told him that he had to go, and he's now living in a basement apartment. I'm not sure if he's dead now, but years ago he had some YouTube, where he was giving his experience in Jamaica during the 1990s and how the government deliberately demolished the Black entrepreneurial class in Jamaica, in a country that people think is a symbol of Black empowerment and stuff like that, but it is not. Right? You are only loved when you play by the rules and you are not too vociferous. And if you're too vociferous, you've got to leave, just like Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica. He went to the United States and they deported him back to Jamaica, but because he was too Black. Do you know that the people like they say Michael Manley, his father, we were talking about Michael Manley the other day, Norman Manley and Michael Manley were of the brown class, right? And his father, Norman Manley, that's Michael Manley's father, thought that Marcus Garvey was too Black and he wasn't a part of that class. Even though Marcus Garvey was a bright man and he at that time was world-renowned, Jamaican middle class and the upper echelon of that society did not accept him. They could not tolerate him. All right? And this is the same thing there now. The only way a Black person can survive in the system is if you toe the line. You have to go with the system. You can't tell them where they're going wrong. You can't challenge the system, because if you do, so let us say that you have like Marie, if you get a loan now and she accedes to the highest echelon of the site and she wants other Black Trinidadians to access wealth and loans in Trinidad, she would be defeated, or they would try to malign her, because that's how the system works. The system works against us. You have to be extremely strong, and we have to be united for us to be able to survive in a very crude system right here in the Caribbean. Now, we have Z saying the process by which, I think I read that already, and I want to now, Z saying, Andrew, you raised an excellent point with Miss Universe and Miss World pageants. In actuality, all supposedly Black winners, except perhaps Miss Jamaica 2 years ago and Miss South Africa, were hybrids. Absolutely. Most of them are hybrids. And it was just in recent times that you could go there and you could also have the women could have their natural hair. For the most part, it was not allowed. I think there was a one called Davina Bennett who went to who represented Jamaica about some years ago. I think probably 8 years ago. She went to Miss Universe, and they were asking her, "Where are you going with that natural hair?" She had an afro, and the people in Jamaica were very disturbed, by saying, "Where are you going?" I think she was first or second runner-up in the competition. But the fact of the matter, she said that she was going as she is with her natural hair, right? If you don't do your hair and look European, then they think that you are not beautiful. So even that, women, for example, we often talk about men and blackness and as far as men are concerned, but we do not understand how women, black women, the sort of pain that they have, because it's double racism that they have to go through. So they have to go through the racism of the color. As men, we are black, so we have to go through that. But again, of also colorism, even within our black group, where, if they're not the lighter shade, then it means, therefore, that they're not also going to be seen as beautiful. Right? Because most black men, my complexion, sees that women who are lighter, that's women that they think are women that symbolize success and status, right? So you want to be able to walk with a browning, as they would say in Jamaica. Now we have Alexis is saying, in any society that contains whites, there is racism. Yes, but you're right. You're right about that. But we have to also look at how of racism now splinters into classism, because the two are so intertwined and interrelated that sometimes we tend to be comfortable in the Caribbean because we don't have the sort of segregation that black people in the United States went through, right? So we say, oh, we are one and we're one Caribbean. There's no racism in the Caribbean, right? Why talk about it? It doesn't, Annie on the thing. Annie always said there's no racism in Trinidad. She always says that. She says that everybody's living well. It is the authorities who are actually, I hope Annie will come and defend her case here tonight. Now we have Z saying the black women who one had to be lightened with another race in order to dilute their ethnic features. Absolutely. Because let us look at even Michelle Obama, whether we like her or not, right? Her husband won the thing because he was mixed, right? We know that he was a mixed race. That's Barack Obama. But when you look at Michelle, even though she's very qualified, well-spoken, and she ticks all the boxes, probably to be a president, the fact of the matter is that I don't think they will allow her, right? I don't think they will allow her by the fact that she is not of the mixed race. America probably wouldn't want her to represent the entire country. This is how racism is so terrible, and we're still living the effects of it even in 2026, right? So I think that to some extent, we've got to get out of this thing that it's just classism, because we know that racism, as Alexis is saying, and classism are combined, are interrelated, are family. Now, this system must be got rid of. Now, the question is, how do we get rid of the system when we are part of the system and we also enable the system? Right? Because as I was saying, as black men, we enable the system by choosing, I'm not saying, no, don't get me wrong, that if you see a light, I'm not like the person like, what is it, Umar Johnson, who thinks that white black men should just only marry to black women. I don't believe that, right? I think if you found the love of your life, and it could be any race, any color, that is who you are, and I'm not going to knock you. The fact is, what we want not to do is to think that the lighter shade women are the ones that we should go for, while leaving women, the darker hue, that they are feeling the pain. And these are things that we practice, right? Another thing also is, how many of us, if Marie were to start a business in Trinidad, would we support her? Okay, if she opens a medical, hospital, whatever clinic that she has in Trinidad, would you support that clinic? Or would you prefer to go to an Indian clinic or go to a white Syrian clinic or whatever clinics you have there in Trinidad? This is another thing. We tend to support white businesses, Asian businesses, while we do not support our own. For some reason, we still think that our institutions are inferior to that of other races or ethnic groups. All right. So it's not only the government. There are things that we also have to look at ourselves internally and have an introspective look, right? Because we also enable the system. I am also guilty in some cases. So we have to, if we begin now to say no, and we want to ensure that we support all Black businesses, then I think that we can move up the rank, okay? Look at Black Americans and every Chinese restaurants, right? Look at the other day in the United States, there was a Chinese man who actually ran down a Black young man, right? Because he, according to what he said, he alleged that the Black teenager or whatever had stolen a bottle of water. And for that, he and his son ran him down and shot him, and they unalived him, right? And now it was just not the other day that Black Americans realized that we have to stop, buying from Asian and supporting their business, because they won't. I mean, for a bottle of water, you're gonna unalive somebody? For a bottle of water, I'm not saying now if he stole it, that was the right thing for him to have done. I don't know. These were allegations, but over a bottle of water, right? That young man, his life was snuffed out. And this is how they look at us. They see us as people who are their inferiors, right? Because I don't think they would have shot a white person. I don't think it would have happened. Now, Marcus is saying that's how Haiti was. Even after the revolution, the southern half of the island was run by mulatto. I'm happy you're bringing up that point, Marcus. The north by Henri Christophe. Right. So sometimes we look at the Haitian Revolution also. The Haitian Revolution should have been ongoing. It was not just because they had kicked out these three major empires that it stopped. I think the same thing for us. Our independence is ongoing, right? It's not because the British went back to Britain, right? It's still ongoing because the legacies are still there. And during the revolution, the Haitian Revolution particularly, the mulattoes were on the side of France. Do you know that? They were anti-Toussaint. The mulattoes in Haiti they thought Toussaint and the Black slaves were their inferiors. Okay, so that is something that we also have to talk about, and I would like perhaps another time to invite Professor that was with us yesterday, that was on Sunday yesterday, that's his what's his name again? Yeah, the professor, the great professor, to come back and talk to us about racism in Haiti. Because some people just think that Haiti is just this, yes, it's predominantly Black like Jamaica, but you have these racial minorities, the Polish and the Syrians and other racial minorities who live there. So you're right. And there was a schism, divide between the North, right, and also other parts of Haiti. Michelle is saying Too Black to Succeed, right? The Too Black to Succeed, the FinSAC Experience by Valerie C. Dixon. One day I'm going to try to invite her here because she will let you know the pain that she went through, right? The pain that she went through. She actually said that she was actually, they told her that she should have left her house, right? And she told them that, to give her some time to, who can get out of the house. You sent her the letter today and you wanted to get out of the house tomorrow. I mean, that's impractical, right? So do you know that she said that after they told her, they came to tell her that she needs to leave the house, that she went for some exercise. And when she came back from the exercise, the guys who came to evict her from her home went into the home and they shoved everything outside. So can you imagine you come back to your home after exercise and you see everything, all of your bed, everything you own, your furniture outside? Now, this was how a Black woman was treated in a Black country, in a predominantly Black country. And at that time, it was a Black prime minister who looks exactly like myself. Right? So we must understand that even Black people, and that's why sometimes I don't get into the racial, sometimes it's black and white, because our people also participate. Okay, our people are also enablers of this racial hierarchical structure, because what they do when a few of us get to the top, just like the house slaves, we sometimes begin to beat and to lash the slaves on the plantation. Now, Trevor is saying racial classification was created by German anthropologist Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in 1779, in his book on the natural variety of mankind. Yes, and then we know that it was, what's his name? The cousin of the guy there that wrote on the natural selection. I can't remember his name, but we know that he actually refined some of these ideas propagated by this anthropologist that Trevor is talking about. He proposed that humanity was divided into 5 principal races: the Caucasian, Mongolian, and the Malayan, and the Ethiopian, and American. And we know that Ethiopian stands for the black race, the black man. Yeah. And then we have Hebrew saying too black to succeed by Valerie Dixon, for 440,000 black businesses wiped out in FinSac organized crime. Yes, 440,000. Is it 44,000? Not 440,000, but 44,000. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Wiped out. Correct. Now we have that as we go to the comments here. Wendy Fitzwilliams of Trinidad was full black in her natural hair and she was rebuffed. Wow. Wow. And we are the ones, how do we fight against a system that is so deeply entrenched? Now, again, somebody's asking the question, why are we being sent to these pageantries, right, to these shows when we know what the symbol of that the entire system is rigged? Why don't black people also set up their own pageants where you can have black beauties on the stage? And we can have our own understanding of what beauty represents. And that's a good thing that we should have. But we think we always rely on these people, and they are the standard of what success is, what beauty is, what success is, what everything is. And that is how we do the things. Now, the Mandis, mulattoes, Arabs, Hindus, whites are the same plantation class defeated by the Negro Maroon Wars. They are black with subtle tactics, using politics, stakeholders, and backdoor deals in Jamaica. Now, yes, but remember now that we also have to define what blackness is. What is blackness? Because in Brazil and in many Latin American countries, you can be black as me and be white. Why? Because it's almost like you're in a certain class and you are not like the others. They will tell you that you are not like the others. So in terms of when we say somebody's black, because we understand, as Trevor is saying, and I've mentioned, that race is a social construct, it's not a natural phenomenon. So you can buy your way into what anybody defines you as. Okay? So somebody might look at a black person and define that person as white because he is a part of that economic class and is tied to that economic and political power. And we have to understand this. So yes, so even though the Manleys were not, as we're saying, 100% Europeans, but we know that they were more, connected to that sort of colonial class. Z saying, here's an interesting question. To what extent is it a practice in Jamaica to cross over from black to white if you are of a particularly high color? I don't think Jamaicans have any sort of fascination for whites, for being white. I think what they have a fascination with is being lighter hue, lighter complected, right? Because the society is predominantly black, so you don't have the racial minority of whites is probably 0.2 or less, I don't know. But the fact is that the mulattoes, right, or mestizos, if you will, I think, and to some extent, Indians and other racial minorities in Jamaica, the lighter the skin hue, the lighter the complexion, that is what the person yearns for. So we know that the predominant brown class in Jamaica, they are the wealthier class. So most Jamaicans are lightening their skin to represent that sort of brown class. So in Kingston, for example, you have what is known as uptown and downtown. I think that is becoming less of a reality, but in former times, you have mostly the brown elites that lived uptown and the predominantly black class, working class living in downtown Kingston. That is. So you used to have that sort of people trying to get to that level of the brown class because that's the only way you'll be able to rise. You could be able to climb the ladder of success. So in terms of whiteness, I don't think they yearn to be white. I think they yearn to have a lighter complexion so that they think that they'll be able to succeed in that predominantly, the racial, I shouldn't say it's predominantly, the ones who succeed are the brown class for the most part. I beg to disagree. Wendy Fritz William was not fully black, neither was Penny Comison in 1977. Well, that's another interesting question we have to answer too. Are we entirely black? How do we know if somebody is fully black? That's another thing that we have to define, because most of us in the Caribbean, and you have seen some very dark-skinned people like myself, and if you look at our genealogy way back when, we have some sort of racial mixing. I think the Caribbean is not the United States South, right? Or where they had this white, black, and they were strict in terms of maintaining that superiority. And even right now, people are suggesting that even in US South, you have scientists who are suggesting that over 90% of the population are mixed. Even though they look white, they are mixed. They have black blood, right? So we have been living together for such a long time. And, they were raping, a lot of things were happening. People loved each other too, and lots of raping occurred. So a lot of us are mixed, and we might look predominantly black, but I think that a lot of times we have, if you go way, way back into our history, you'd see that we have Indian mixing, probably Chinese mixing, European mixing, indigenous mixing. It's the Caribbean racial dynamics are really very deep, right? They go very deep, and because we don't practice segregation as the United States did, we are mixed for the most part. I'm not saying now that there are people that you won't find holistically African, maybe you will, but when you go to Trinidad, for example, I'm sure that the majority of the populace, even though they might look to some extent predominantly African or Indian or whatever, they have some mixture. Trevor is saying, very true, the browning or red woman who is a more fair complexion could be a square and be attractive just because of color. Absolutely. The dark men and women tend to always want to obtain her qualities. She is the symbol of beauty and the symbol of success in many societies. And we can see also in the NBAs and the sports guide, the NFL and all of this in the United States, the black athletes tend to want, white women or very light-skinned mulatto women. Steve Knight is saying, no, they will not allow Michelle to run. You are so right about that. Yeah, even though she could win, right? Even though she could win. I mean, when she went to talk at the last convention they had, Democratic convention, when, what's her name, was going up, Harris was going up for the presidency. When she spoke, and always when she speaks, right, people listen. So she could win. If the Democrats want to win the election again, she would be a great person to put on the Democratic ticket. But because of her race, that they know they could be playing with a terrible, and American society tend to be very hypocritical. So they will pretend like they're supporting you one moment, and then the next moment they don't, right? So I think they don't want to play with that card, even though they know that she is very qualified and would attract many people. Now, another classic, Trevor is saying, another classic would be the African girls, specifically Nigerians, who are very snooty, despite not being slave babies, yet are the biggest weave wearers and divestors. The African countries now are just involved in this, the weaving and the wigs that we have now that we're wearing, and in this very hot climate also. I wonder how women are doing it. And sometimes the wigs are very heavy, very weighty. How do they allow that such weight to be on their heads? I don't know. And I'm sure that it's affecting their health. I'm sure for women, it's affecting their health. It can't be something that is healthy for you to be living in such warm climates and having these long, heavy wigs on your head. But it's a symbol of beauty for women, right? So the fact of the matter is that I know there was this Barbadian, right? And he was preaching and he said something rather funny, hilarious. He said that, somebody asked him the question, shouldn't women cover their heads when they go to church? And he said, do you think black women today who spend so much money on a wig, right? And they want to showcase their wig to everyone in the church to see. Do you think they would want to cover their heads in today's, in today's century? But it is a joke, but it's true, right? They're there to showcase their hair and say, yeah, my hair is long and beautiful. Now, we think that their ice is colder. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Hebrew is saying here, and we're getting some very interesting and deep comments about the race stratification in the Caribbean. We get rid of the system by full-blooded tribing up. The Bible's against mixed marriages due to idol worship. The inheritance in their tribes, Solomon perished for marrying pagan women. But let's be clear here now that the Bible didn't talk about racial mixing. It talked about cultural, religious mixing, right? So that is different from racial mixing, because the Bible says too that we're made from one blood. Out of one man, from one man, right, did we have all the nations to dwell on the face of the earth. So the fact of the matter is that, we know that in the Caribbean, let's be clear and also let's be real, we are mixed for the most part, right? We are mixed. And if we were to do DNA, whatever, and many people have done it, they will say that they are, 60% Nigerian, whatever, Ghanaian, and then they say they have 2% European or 2% Scottish or whatever, right? So we, in this region here, whether we like it or not, it's not clearly defined whether we can say we are holistically white or we are 100%, black. Even people who look white could have black blood, right? Because they're living in a predominantly, black African region. So they look white, but they probably have some amount of black blood, West African blood. Steve Knight is saying, stopped him in the back, the media somehow failed to mention that part shot that boy in the back. Yes. And it was so sad that they would have run him down and would have killed him just because of his race. In Barbados, as recently as the 1960s, a black mother at the christening of her child could not give that child a name that the whites had given to theirs. The christening was not performed. Wow. That's interesting. Legacy of slavery, right? And colonialism. Wow. That's deep. And then we have here, is it Alexis? No, Trevor. There is a movie being promoted heavily right now called Citizen Vigilante. As the name suggests, it's all about killing immigrants as justice and shows all immigrants as criminals. Great timing. And many of the times these movies are actually created because that's what they're going to do. Do you know that many of the movies that have been shown to you guys in Hollywood are what? They're trying to tell you that the world is moving to that. But many people think it's just some myth or some fiction, so they just continue to laugh and not understanding that the powers that be are trying to let them know or warning them that this is where the society is moving to. So when you watch your movies, just look at it as entertainment, but look at it, as Trevor is doing, as something that might happen or is happening in real life. Alexis is saying getting rid of the system starts with admitting that these evil exists. Correct. Education and actively forming committees to look at and identify these attitudes. Unfortunately, our education system is one in which it's also designed by the same people who are supporting the system. Right? So you hear a lot about racism in schools, but they don't really tell you about the people who control the system of power, the power hierarchy, do they? No, because they have to hide that. What they do in the schools, however, they are very good at saying to you that your neighbor is the problem, right? So if you have an Indian neighbor next to you, he or she is the problem, right? Not the person who is controlling the power system, but your neighbor. And that is what the education system has now dwarfed into. Okay, so we are the ones who have to say who are at the power, who controls the system, and then we can say that is the person who needs to go, or those are the people who need to go, not the person who is your neighbor, who will not be able to do anything about the system. Now, it does not mean that they might not benefit from the system, but it does mean also that they control the system. Okay, these are two things. It's almost like your father or mother, being like a thief, right? And they go out and they steal, right? And you benefit from it, but you didn't steal, right? It happened that you benefit from that system. So the same thing we have to do. So the education system now is what needs to be, reformed and transformed, and for us to highlight and to unmask the people at the top who control the system and who make the system the way, or shape the system and molded the system into being what it is today. The Finsack stole homes in Jamaica, and the stolen businesses went to politicians, their friends, white mulattoes in and out of Jamaica. That is why the final report is still under seal and not made public. Yes, right? Because they don't want Black people to be what? To be entrepreneurs. That's the thing. Whether in Jamaica or it's in Trinidad or it's in Barbados. They don't want Black people to be entrepreneurs. But I think to some extent, I must say that Black people have now begun to become comfortable with being consumers. I think we are. And I just think we just want to sit down and watch developments and say, oh, that high-rise building going up there and that business going up there. Oh, my country looks good and it's developed, right? And when you say, who controls that tall building there? Oh, it's an American white person, or it's a European investor, and you don't care about it. All you want to see is that you have your cell phone and you think what you believe to be development, and all is well, right? We are not ambitious anymore of becoming entrepreneurs as in the days of the 90s and before. I think we've lost that sort of zeal, right? We've lost that zeal. Chile, Brazil, and DR, even Southeast Asia, are all places who show the mainstream look. We are all family with no appeased white beauty standards. All of these places have Black indigenous people. Well, the fact of the matter is that in these countries like the DR and Brazil, they don't highlight Black culture, right? They are there in DR, for example. Most Dominicans will tell you that they are Indios, and they'll say Indio Claro, Indio Lavado, and they have all of these names for not being Black, right? And then you have Black towards the bottom, and then you're really Prieto, which means that you are like a tar, right? You're Haitian. Hey, es un Prieto. And Prieto is where you're really, really dark skinned, and they think that you don't even should be in their society, right? So they do not see themselves as Black at all. Trevor is saying another big joke is Puerto Ricans being Black, but many will fight you to the nail. They are Puerto Rican, just like the DR. Yet whites, the system, and science still this day states one drop and you are Black, right? Well, that's the whole point. That do we believe that system though? Should we say that we're Black or we're white? What if you are mixed? So if your father is white and your mother is Black, yes, I know the United States is suggesting, and other, these countries like in Great Britain and Canada, saying that the one drop means you're Black, but that is not the reality, right? Because you can't deny your white grandmother, right, or your Black African father, So I think that I prefer that too. When they say what country you're from, that is the best way to recognize you. Then from the country to the culture, from the culture to whatever color you are. I think that is what should predominate. The color should be at the bottom, by the way, because the color does not define who you are, right? It's your culture that indicates and your national, identity that really determine who you are as a person. And of course, your character and all that stuff. So I agree with the DR, and from that perspective, this Black thing and white thing does not define a person. And that is why you find, to some extent, African Americans lack a sense of identity, because you can't just describe yourself as Black. You have to be aligned with a culture. And many of them, for example, let us say that the difference between a Black American of Caribbean descent or a Black American of African descent is that they can always say that they are of Jamaican, Trinidadian, Nigerian, Ghanaian descent, and they feel a sense of identity and connection. To just say that you're Black or even a white person in America, A white person in America is going to say that I'm of what, German descent, I'm of British descent, and they tend to highlight that because they know that just being white does not mean anything to them too, right? They tend to appreciate that they are from this culture, Italian or they're Spanish or they're Dutch or they're whatever, right? So this black and white situation are something that we also need not to be so caught up into. Now, we shouldn't use them because we understand how they are used, and we have to live with that reality. But we must know that if we want to define ourselves in the complex manner in which we are as individuals, we can't just say that we're white or we're black. Very important we understand that. And I don't describe myself as just being white and black because it doesn't mean anything. Trevor says, which goes back to the topic of the presidents of the United States having black presidents from before, right? And even in the racial South in the US, same thing, and many more, right? And it goes back to that. And it shows also that they're more than we think they are, because in some cases, they also have indigenous blood in them. In some cases, also, some of the presidents had Caribbean blood in them. I think is it Adams was from Grenada? One of them was from Grenada, or the family members emigrated from Great Britain to Grenada and then to United States. Right, so the Caribbean, is pretty diverse, and people, in terms of the peoples that came here, we had racial mixing and blending. It's difficult to say that this is white or this is black. Just say we're people, and Trinidadians, and you have Indians, Trinidadians. Last night, I kid you not, I was talking to a white American, right? And there was a Trinidadian Chinese, a Trinidadian of Chinese descent, who was walking. And I said, oh, that's a Chinese. I know him. I've spoken to him before. He's Trinidadian and of Chinese descent. And the guy looks so much as a Chinese person. And he was like, oh, no, I've never heard that. I said, you're not hearing that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. The person is Trinidadian, of Chinese descent, and does look Chinese, but the fact of the matter was born in Trinidad and now is residing in Canada. And this is how people get so convoluted, because they have never heard of Chinese people living in the Caribbean. It means therefore that it does not exist, because all they think is, oh, you have to be white, Asian, or Latino, or black. Okay? They can't understand that you can have a Syrian Trinidadian, right? Or a Muslim Trinidadian, an Indian Trinidadian, whatever. They can't understand that, because their understanding of race is that it's just black or white, right? And you're Asian from India or from China or from the Asian continent. When the Caribbean is too complex a region to just say that we are black or white and Asian, because we are mixtures. We have racial mixing, and that is who we are. So that's why it's best to say, I'm Trinidadian. And if you want to say I'm black, yeah, I'm black. Or I'm Barbadian. And if you want to say I'm white or Indian, whatever, right? Because that your Barbadianness and your Trinidadianness should represent who you are. What you eat, what you believe, your religion or lack of, whatever. The way how you dress, all of that represents who you are. And that is why when you go to America, the so-called melting pot, whether you have a white Barbadian or a Indian Trinidadian, they all come together because they're under that rubric of a Barbadian, Trinidadian, Caribbean culture. It is a culture that defines us and not the color of our skin. Yes, we have to deal with that in Canada and the United States because that is their reality. But our reality is slightly different. And that is what we have to understand. In recent times, I see that we are adopting US definition of racism and all of that to define ourselves, and that we're black and we're white. And it's creating a lot of problems here because our culture is different. Classism, yes, we have to talk about that seriously because that is what is affecting us. And could it be that the powers that be in the Caribbean want us to be distracted about race and not to look at classism and how classism is destroying the Caribbean unity, because we don't really have the deep racial hatred, but we do have problems with classism. Now, Harris claimed she was Indian, and then when she ran, turned black. And that's a very interesting comment you're making, because the other day I was watching a video of a gentleman who was saying that, Kamala Harris' father, right? Her father is not white, right? He's Jamaican, but I think he has some Indian heritage too. I think he has some European, Indian, and whatever heritage in his blood, and black in his blood, right? So how do you define her as the American media wanted to just simplify her as, on her mother's side, she's Indian, on her father's side, she's black, right? And it doesn't work like that in the Caribbean, right? So the fact is that he's mixed. And I think, if I'm not lying, her father has some Indian blood in him. So she might have some DNA from both sides, from her mother's side and from her father's side, plus black blood, white blood, all of that. So the Caribbean region is very complex, and we must get our history and facts straight about that. So we have Alexis saying, so then they are in love with these women. This type of woman is attractive because of her color, complexion. What about her substance and education? Well, that is it. That women, for men, yes, that is important too. That for some men, education is important. But when it comes on to status, I don't know, it's important. But I think if a woman knows how to dress and carry herself well, the education in some cases might not be all that important, even though it's important. But I think that a white black man will go for a woman who probably is less educated. She's still sophisticated, has some amount of education in terms of reading and carrying herself in a proper and appropriate manner. But the status is something that is. So look at white people. There are some white people who don't know anything, right? They don't know anything. They're dull. But because of their color, they get into Harvard University. They get into the top universities of the world. Look at George W. Bush. George W. Bush was a C student, and he got into Harvard University, right? Because of his color. So we talk about that because, it does exist, even though that person might not be as brilliant and sophisticated as a dark-skinned woman, she is going to pass the mark for a dark-skinned man who wants to think that she is a symbol of beauty and a symbol of status. Okay? Steve Knight is saying, Trevor, you are so right. She started to switch up when she was doing speeches around the South. But he's right, because guess what? In the American culture, she has to do that. Why? Because she can't just run and say that she is just Indian. They're not going to work. They're not going to vote for her, right? If she's appealing to black voters, she has to say she's black. Look at Obama also. Obama, if you read many of his biographies, they will let you know that even when he was at Harvard University, the black American students said that he was never around them. He was always around the white students. Even in the cafeteria, he never hung out with them. He was always with his white people, right? And he would just say hi and bye. So Obama culturally is more white than black. I repeat that. Obama culturally is white and not black. And many black Americans could not understand that, because they're just looking at phenotype and not looking at the culture. That he was raised by a white woman and the mother, and then the grandparents who raised him in terms of sending him to school and so forth. And whites were around him. He went to elite institutions where he was surrounded by culturally white people. So what he had to do when he wanted to win the election, he had to make himself, they had to, paint him as a black man. He's black technically because he's mixed, and that's what Americans say. You're black if you have just one drop. You want one of your parents is black. But the fact of the matter, the reality is, he's not culturally black, right? He's physically black, but not culturally black. I hope you understand, and that's the difference. Z saying, you are right. The Caribbean is incredibly mixed. The feature existing side by side with racism and colorism makes the problem extremely difficult to solve. Yes, it is very mixed. It is very mixed. And I'm sure if we should go to have a DNA test, go to Trinidad, for example, or anywhere you go, there's going to be a lot of racial mixing. And people are not going to be just purely Indian or purely white or purely Syrian or purely whatever they say they are, right? There are things happening and people are attracted. We're humans, and, we tend to be prejudicial, but when it comes on to sexual relationship, if you find a woman attractive, you find her attractive in any race, right? And in any color, and people do what they do, right? And they produce children, and the children come mixed, right? So let's be clear, and let also be practical in our conversation. Steve Knight is saying, let's not forget the shooting of Latasha Harlan in California. That lady got probation, and it helped fuel the riots in California. Correct. So Trevor is saying, yes, we are mixed, but we have the haplogenetics will show exactly where your ancestry is from, but more corruption, the tests are gate-kept, and Jewish people are the only ones banned worldwide from such DNA tests. Now, that is true. One of the things, too, I don't trust a large extent some of the DNA tests. And the DNA tests today are not going to show you everything. The complexity of racial mixing. It's not going to, science is not perfect, right? And it might miss, as I'm saying to you, when you have generations of racial mixing, you can look white because maybe as you go by, you have less mixing and you look more white or you look more black. But at the same time, you can't deny the hundreds of years that your great-great-grandfather could have been African or could have been European, could have been Indian, could have been Chinese. You can't. You will look at some Jamaicans, for example, and I'm sure anybody in the Caribbean, and they're black like midnight, and their eyes give them away. Their eyes look like Chinese, right? They have those Chinese eyes or Indian look. And they very, very dark skin, look African, look like whatever, but something, their nose, the shape of their nose or their eyes give them away because it's racial mixing. And sometimes when your parents have, you could be two Africans, and if you have in your years, way back in the centuries, you have some Asian in your DNA, it can reflect in your children in later years. So the fact of the matter is that we have to be careful, and that's why I don't like the white, black, Indian thing of just saying people are this and people are that. In the Caribbean, it's too much of a mixing, and we're too small. We're islands, so people were interacting, right? And they were also, sexually engaged, if you will. Now, Z is saying that's why checking for your ancestry has become a very dangerous thing. You're giving away your biometric. I'm happy you're coming up with that because I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to say it at that point. Your biometric data and paying to do so. Absolutely. And they can tell you what you are, and you might be more than what they're telling you are. Right? What if you are black as you're saying you are, and they're saying, hey, but according to your genetic thing, you have, 40%. What do you call it now? European blood in you, in your DNA, all of that. So all of these things, we have to be very careful of them. I'm not saying you can't do them. I will never say don't do them, because maybe some way to find out who your ancestors are, But at the same time, you cannot just, just like vaccines, you can't just say that this is 100% correct, right? Science has its limitations, and sometimes it cannot be able to trace lineage years, centuries ago. It won't be able to do it. But the color being attached to culture will trump all, because people are only existing by what they see. It's only the surface, but they won't look below. Absolutely. But the thing about it is that we are more than what we appear on the surface, aren't we? Right? So you might see me, Trevor, and you see I look sad, but maybe I am not sad, maybe it's just the way how you perceive me, but maybe I'm joyful, So the fact of the matter is that we have to be careful what we see just on the surface. And that's why I think culture first, your nationality first. Let me say where I'm from, then I can educate you about my culture, right? And then and then you can talk about my color, if you will. But to say that you're just black, what does that mean? To say that you're just white, what does that mean? And even whites in America, they talk more about their descent, right? Whether they're Italians or they're Germans, right? And African Americans can't do that for the most part. Those who are what we call the ones who have been there for years. Only the Caribbean ones, the ones who are of Caribbean descent and African descent, can do that. And they're very proud when they do that because they know that there is some connection to a home, right? Whether it's in Trinidad or it's in Barbados or it's in Ghana. They know. And that is what gives them identity. If they don't have a home that they can connect to, many times they just lose it, right? Z saying, Andrew, based on your objective observations, has colorism and racism in Jamaica diminished from, say, 20 or 30 years or 40 years ago, or has it gotten worse? I think superficially it has gotten better, right? So from a superficial perspective, just like you see in America, it looks superficial. You won't see, for example, that only in Jamaica, for example, in the 1960s, 50s and 60s, only light-complected, people could work in the banks. And I'm sure in many Caribbean countries that was the case, right? If you were of my hue, you just could not be a bank teller in the bank, right? You've got to be brown or white, okay? In some schools in Jamaica, also in the 1950s, only white people could go there, and very high mulatto, okay? So yes, when you go there now, you see a lot of black people working in the banks, lots of black students in all schools, right? So yes, from a superficial, but in terms of the power elites and the systems of power, it has not. And that's what we're saying, that we can't just look at the lower levels of the hierarchy and where you will see improvements, which we are seeing improvement. We would be lying if we say that they're not improvement at the lower, right, ebb of the hierarchy. But when you go up now to the highest level of who controls power, it hasn't. It's the same. It hasn't changed. Just a few black representations, yes, but it hasn't changed in terms of who holds the power, who wields power over these black people, right? So that will be my response. Let me continue now with another comment. You are giving some share the live, like the live, guys, so we can have people come on the live, because this is a very interesting conversation, and we want this conversation to be had, and only you can have it. I can't have it by myself. Alexis is saying, as we examine this issue, it indicts us as blacks as weak and shameful. It's a struggle because, again, just like the professor yesterday, the Haitian professor yesterday was saying that it's difficult to get rid of the ruling class. Remember, there was a question that was asked by one of you guys, and so how can we get rid of the ruling class in Haiti? And he says it's going to be difficult. You can't just get rid of that. It's going to be a difficult battle because this is years, and they control everything from hospitals to schools to all the political institutions. So it's very difficult to pass them. And people are saying, why can't the diaspora help and change Haiti or change this country? It's difficult. I think we would have to unite. All of us would have to, just like the Haitians during the revolution united, and they were able to defend. What is happening now in the Caribbean is that many of our leaders are so tied to the ruling elites and ruling class in these countries like America, Great Britain, Canada, that they would betray us. But look at Toussaint Louverture. He did not betray his people. He actually worked on their behalf, and Marcus Garvey and all these people. But these leaders, or misleaders, as many people say, will betray us at any given moment. Okay, so it's not we're weak, it's that we don't have the power. But if we should unite and come together, perhaps power will have some power, and then we'll be able to dethrone them. And first, let us stop supporting their businesses. Let us begin today and tomorrow to start supporting black businesses. So if Marie Antoinette tomorrow should form a clinic or whatever business she's forming in Trinidad, that you guys will support her there and say you're buying her products, because we want to support black businesses. The one-drop rule, Michelle is saying, welcome to the live, Michelle, wasn't always a rule of law in America. In the early days, you're correct. After America became independent, you actually took the race of your mother, right? So a white woman could have a mixed race child. Yes, Absolutely. And that's exactly what happened, particularly in Louisiana. In Louisiana, that was the case. And remember, too, that the United States was made up of different states, of course, and different cultures. So many of the people who inhabit Louisiana, New Orleans, that area, came from the Caribbean, came from places like Haiti after the revolution. And they had a distinctive understanding of what race is. Right. So if you go to Brazil, they have a distinctive understanding of race. If you go to Jamaica, they have a distinctive understanding of race than if you go to America. And some people confuse, and that's why they will say to Dominicans, you're black. But they have a different understanding of what blackness and whiteness and mulatto and mestizo is in Latin America. So we have to understand that even though people like to, what should I say now? They like to impose upon people America's standard of what they consider to be race and beauty and all of that stuff, and economic growth, GDP growth, and all of these things. And some of these things are flawed. So what about us saying this is how we treat race in our country? This is how we define classism in our country, and not define it as Americans and Canadians do, because then we are going to get into trouble because our reality differs from theirs. And as Michelle is pointing out here, it wasn't always as simplistic as we have it now. In some cases, they were mixed, but they allowed that the mother was the person who would say the child will get her racial identity from her mother. Now, Z saying that is true. It's an ugly truth. We have been conditioned to be weak. Right. Yeah, we have been conditioned to be weak, and we should stop. But I think the greatest gain, the greatest way to fight them is to unite and stop supporting their businesses. If we do that, then I think that they will hear us, and they will try to, they understand that we are not going to build them up in their bad behavior. Michelle Forster is saying, and that child would be white. I suspect America may have accepted Barack Obama was more acceptable because his mother was white and his father was black African. Yes. And the fact of the matter is also that his mother, many people don't understand that the presidents of the United States, most of them, if not all of them, the majority of past US presidents have had linkage back to the British throne, right? To the monarchical throne of Britain. So on Obama's side, his mother's side, I think she can trace her lineage back to the British throne, right? It is sad, but many people think the United States is this free democratic country, but it is not that free. And the system of power there is controlled, right? It is controlled. But we think that the presidents are just the people who elect them. They are selected, and then you elect them, right? And President Obama was the same. He was accepted because his mother was tied to the ruling class. Do you know that I understand that Obama used to be, when he was a child, used to go to the bushes and he would play with them. So when he was up and he was talking against George Bush, when he was vying for the presidency, he already was accustomed to being around that family because he was a part of that inner group, that inner circle. But the media gave us illusion that here is this black man who was just coming from a middle class mother, and she had him, and with an African father, and he was bright, and of course he's a bright man. He went to elite schools, and he just gained the presidency like that. It didn't happen like that, right? It just didn't happen like that. Michelle is saying sometimes, okay, I think that we have, let's go to now Slimy Show. Her father was Irish, I think. Yes. And then we have here Stephen Knight is saying he's Indian, and the American media fooled a lot of people into thinking she was black, and she is not. Well, the fact of the matter is that if the United States says that one black blood, you're black, then from that perspective, she was black. Culturally, she was not black, but she could be black in the sense that she went to a black institution. That's the only way she probably could say that she was black. That's Kamala Harris, because she went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. She did not grow up with her father. She grew up with him for a very short time, right? And so she was more among her Indian sort of family. So I think I agree with them that she's more Indian. Culturally, she's more Indian than black, but she, from a phenotypical perspective, the US is the one which sets that standard that just one black blood, and her father definitely would qualify as a black man in America, right? Then from that perspective, she would be black. Okay, so we they're the ones who stop their rules, right? And they like to change their rules when it doesn't suit them, right? But culturally, we can say, just like we can say, culturally, Obama was white, and phenotypically, he was black, But the difference between Obama and Kamala is that Obama is brighter. So Obama can really, move comfortably from white to black in terms of moving culturally. He knows how to walk, how to talk the black talk if he wants to, and he moves, seamlessly between both cultures. Kamala doesn't do that as well. Okay. Now we have Michelle is saying, I suspect Kamala Harris was hurt by the intersection of race, class, and gender, and the fact that both her parents are immigrants to the USA, since theirs is an anti-immigrant sentiment. Now, let's also be clear, when they're saying anti-immigrant or anti-black or whomever they're talking about, we must understand that some people are going to be accepted. Some people are going to be accepted, right? So not all immigrants are going to not be accepted. Her stock is going to be accepted because she's a part of the ruling class. The closer you are to the ruling elites, moves you, extracts you from what they think you are. So even I am black, right? And if I'm close to the ruling elites, they can put me into a position of power, but they would not put a person who look like me in a position of power. So we have to understand. So she's close, very close to the ruling elites, that is Kamala. So she can become president if the system allows her to do it, right? Now, Trevor is saying classism is the problem. The lodges and house Negro mentality, fueled by the illusions and indoctrination of the American dream, despite socioeconomic and their location, has blinded many to participate. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too that black people like to see people of importance. We like when we look at Barack Obama and we see somebody who looks like us in a position of power, extreme power, I mean powerful, right? At the same time, that power doesn't help us, right? But it's just that the representation of that power, and that is what got black people in America with Obama, right? He was black, the so-called first black president, and he, of course, connotes power. And the most powerful man in the world was a black man when he was in office. So that really was a trap for many of them, and they were not concerned about the fact that he was setting policies that would have destroyed the community. Many black Americans were turned off by Kamala because she made it clear that she did not support reparations. Yes. And I think too that they saw a phoniness in her that they did not like. As Steve Knight and others were saying, today she's Indian and next day she's black. People don't like you to do that, right? And that was the difference with Obama. Obama never said he was white, right? Or he was of another African or whatever. He was always black, right? He was quite consistent in his racial definition of himself. Kamala was too flip-flopping, and I think nobody likes that. If you say today that you're white and tomorrow you're Indian and tomorrow then you're black, right? Then yeah, people are not going to like that. They see it as phony, and they won't support her. If she was more consistent in her racial definition identity, I think they would have accepted her, because she's culturally black too, right? She's culturally black to some extent, Indian in the sense of her mother thing, but she knows how to do her dances, and she's a part of the sorority and all of that, the black sorority, and these things make you black, Then we have the color dictates access to education in the Caribbean too. At the transition level from primary to secondary, the right class and color gets you into the best secondary school. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have seen many students who weren't bright in Jamaica, but because of their color, they got into some of the best schools. In fact, I was watching some the other day, a very prominent school in Jamaica, I won't call the name of the school, an all-girl institution, right? And I understand that if the parents offer the institution like computers, like, give computers to the computer lab or whatever, their daughter, whether she passed or not, can get into that very elite school, right? So this is what happens in the Caribbean, whether it's also color or money. Remember now that money also can buy your color and class in the Caribbean, and perhaps in the United States too. So if you are a money class, you have lots of money, it can buy you power. It can buy you space into that class, into the power structure, the power dynamics. We must understand that. And that is why they don't like people who are coming back from the United States and they're coming back wealthy. If you notice, the Caribbean is very, what should I say now? They're gatekeepers. So if you went to Harvard and you went to all elite institutions and you go back home, sometimes they don't want to accept you back there because they think you are coming with that sort of uppity, sort of disposition, that they don't want you to come now and you are going to be what? In some sort of their jobs or their positions are going to be endangered by you. Right? So the Caribbean islands are gatekeepers too. And they don't want many of our diaspora back home. Even though I hear Jamaicans saying they want our diaspora to come back home, they don't want them to come back home because it would be too much of a competition and uppityness by some of these people coming back home with their monies and their resources that make the other people who are there look like they're nobodies. And the wealthy and the upper echelon of society, they want to hold on dearly to their power. Obama is Oreo, black outside, white inside, a good sleeper cell. Yeah, that's what they say he is. If changes are to be made in the Deep South when it comes to the Democratic Party, that whole structure needs to be removed. I bet you race relationships will change. Yes, race is what defines everything in America, particularly in the South, in the southern parts of the United States, okay? Race is very, very, the first thing the United States does is look at your race. People define you by your race. And I'm saying to you, that is why many black children are not doing well in schools in America, because people, the moment they look at you, they see you as a black man or a black woman, and they have their impressions of who you should be. And if you are not that, it mystifies them, or they're going to be wondering, why do you behave the way you do? Right? And oftentimes, those of us as Caribbean citizens who lived in the United States, we hear that oftentimes that we are different. You hear it from white people that we're different. We're different. Why are we different? Because our understanding of who we are differs for the most part, from most African Americans, because of the struggles and the, how they see themselves. We did not come from the Caribbean thinking we were black. We knew we were black, and people who are Indian knew that they're Indian, and people who are white know that they're white, or whatever race they belong to, or, But the fact of the matter is that they knew first that they were individuals, they were humans first, and then you can talk about their culture, where they're from, and then you can talk about, if they're Indians or they're blacks or they're whatever, right? That is how we are. We don't come talking about, you're black or you're white. Michelle Forrester is saying, one of my co-workers turned their friends and who immigrated to USA, she believes, JA, should stay in the Commonwealth, and that the British legal system would be better because maybe corruption when, Now, the thing about it is that people fear, and I think with some justification, Michelle, that the system is so classist in the Caribbean. And because we have a smaller space, as I was saying to Mr. Pereira sometimes, last week, I said to him when he talked about the Caribbean Court of Justice, that to some extent, I would prefer if they still have the Privy Court too, even though I respect the Caribbean Court of Justice. I realize that they're smart people. I'm sure they're capable people on that, in that court. But the fact is that we're too small, and many of the people at the upper echelons, they are so closely aligned, and the elites of the Caribbean, whether they're in Barbados or Jamaica or Trinidad, or they work together, right? So let us say that I, as a common person, had a beef or some injustice done to me, with one of the higher class, then the higher classes, what are they going to do? They're going to unite against me because they know me and they all know each other and they take up for each other. When you take it to the Privy Council, they don't know us, they don't care about us. So they just got the facts and say, okay, based on what you're seeing here, I think that Andrew Tucker is in the right or whatever. But if you should leave it up to our Caribbean people to do it, they know each other. They're too much corrupt. It's just a corruption that happens here. And I said something too, and I want to listen to that. Do you know that it takes sometimes 8 to 10 years or more for somebody to get a PhD in the Caribbean at University of the West Indies? Why? Why you can get it in Britain, you can get it for 2. Some people go to Great Britain and do their PhD in 2 years, the maximum 3 years. Why is it taking you such a long time, 15 years? And these are bright people. They have to struggle with these people at the top because those at the top don't want to get a PhD because they don't want to become professors and all of this thing. The Caribbean is too corrupt. So I believe still that we should be, just like we're allowed to do our PhDs abroad and to come back, I think that the system is just too much entrenched in corruption that I would rather see us having the option. I'm not saying that you should not have and work on it and refine it, like the Caribbean Court of Justice and other institutions, but I think that it's important for us to have the connection with, with the so-called motherland, even though she's not the motherland, but if you know what I mean, because of what we are. And my greatest example is when I talk about education. Why do they keep us down? I'll give you another point. Many of you who are living in the United States as Caribbean citizens or went from Barbados or from Trinidad or Jamaica, Guyana, wherever you're from, Antigua, many of you, how many of you were told that you were dunce and you could not achieve anything? You're black and you're dunce, right? How many students have heard that in the Caribbean? And many of them heard that when they were like 10 years old. They had not even developed into a young person yet, right? And when you went abroad, you went to the United States, you went to Canada, you went wherever, and you were nurtured into the person that you are today. So the Caribbean has some very deep, because they are gatekeepers and they don't want the majority of us to prosper. So they have to keep us down. It is deliberate. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have problems in the United States too. They do. But at least we can accept what they have that is good, embrace it, like getting your PhD and not having somebody to breathe over your back and tell you have to spend another 15 years for nothing and keeping you down. And every successive generation does the same thing. Right? It never changes at UA. Michelle Forster saying, I believe both should ask for reparations, whether or not they are actually granted. Now, the reparations is that we have to do, I want to do a program on it. I'm not sure if I can get a guest on to talk about the reparations, because the reparations that they're asking for, as Miss Mia Motley has declared very clearly, she's saying that they're tying reparations with climate change. Right? I did tell you of that. Also, we, Black people and racism, the whole matter of Black empowerment has also been dethroned because they're talking about gay rights. Gay rights now, the LGBTQ, has totally erased Black liberation struggles. The same thing with the climate change agenda. It is my belief, based on what I've read, that the climate change agenda is going to also erase the whole matter of Black reparations. So whatever monies that they probably were going to give, if they were going to give any, to Black reparations, to people of African descent, it is going to go to climate change. Right? We have to make the connections, guys. The same way in which you're not going to hear anything much about Black people anymore, and racism is a post-racial society which is flawed and it's a lie. And right now it's gay rights and LGBTQ rights. The same thing you're going to hear now for the reparations and climate change. Climate change will predominate reparations. Don't be fooled by what they're telling you. Do you think they're going to give you reparations when they're killing Haiti? They're suppressing that state. They are all these neoliberal policies. Look at what they're doing to Cuba. Look at what they did to Venezuela, and you think that they're going to give some black people, right, descendants of black people, reparations? What are we thinking? And this is what I'm saying. We have to connect the dots. Not now. They're not going to do it. Now, Neil deGrasse has confirmed, Alexis is saying, that humanity started as a black person and humanity moved and adapted to environment, etc., a scientific fact. Yes. One of the things about it too is that we tend to live in this, civilization, the romanticization of who started civilization and all of that stuff. We also have to move on now to owning black businesses, because where we came from and who came first and whatever is not going to help us right now, right? What's going to help us now is the now, and what are we doing now to show that our people are equally economically equal. It's their economic equal to any civilization that is on the earth. And right now, it is not pretty. When you look at Haiti, when you look at Jamaica, when you look at many of our countries in Africa, right, the case cannot be proved right now based on what we're going through educationally, economically, and in many socially, culturally. We are at the bottom of the ladder. Right, so all of this romanticization of Africa and Africa this and Africa that is not going to. It's good for our egos, but it's not good for the pockets or economics. We've got to do better, and I think that is what we're saying all the time. We spend lots of time talking about harping on the past, but we have to remind ourselves of it, but we have to now fast track and move on to greater things. Now, Trevor is saying that's a whole other conversation given the deep roots of modern day black nationals wherever they are, right? And then we have, good evening, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining. Make sure you're sharing the live. And people, stay on the live, get something in. Let's have this conversation, because this is a very deep conversation. I know it takes some time to think, it's effort to think, but you have to think, right? So we have here in Canada, we have many cultures. We were mostly a country of Europeans up until 5 years ago. Now it is totally different. So if we were so racist, why would so many people come here? Now, this is a question we hear all the time. Now, the fact of the matter is that many people did not want to go to Canada and the United States, and many people want to remain in their countries. However, many times these countries like Canada and the United States, and the West in particular, they set policies that enable people, that destroy people's country, and they have no other means but going there. Right? And that is what is happening. So it is not that they want to go there, because many of them there, when they get there, they do complain. And they complain about the racism, they complain about the weather, they complain about all other things that might not be to their benefit. But if they can equal to the standard of living, yes. Look at DR and Haiti. It's not because the Haitians want to live in the DR, but it's because of the economic policies that have been set in Washington to have prospered the DR more than Haiti. So you find that the Haitians are now moving en masse to the DR because they find greater opportunities in the DR. But many of them would prefer living in Haiti. I hope you understand that. It's very important we understand that. It's not that we sometimes travel for various reasons. Now, some people travel because they love Canada. Don't get me wrong. There are people who travel to, Haitians who might go to the DR because they want to study there. They love it and other things. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all sort of conversation. It's just that we have to understand that this is the reality. Now, Michelle Foster is saying she also loves the British royal family and praises them for teaching good manners. I think the educational system of her time, since she is retirement age, instills a preference for excusing Britain. Who is that? Who is the she here? I'm not sure who you're referring to, Michelle. And then we have history before the transatlantic slave trade is always overlooked, but they are always pointed to their history in Africa or after Africa as slaves. You're correct. The only thing, and I'm for history, but you see, I think that the history also has been romanticized by many of our Black scholars, and we want to remain in that romanticization of the history, but that is not going to help us to grow. The Jews were like that too, you know. They kept on harping back to Solomon's temple after Solomon's temple had been destroyed, but the temple was destroyed, right? And they weren't able to go back to those glory days when they enjoyed and they were so prosperous, and you know, their temple was the best and finest in the world. Okay, so we too have to grow up, and we have to begin to say that we're not going back to the days of history of, you know, when we were kings and queens. We have to make ourselves kings and queens by having, you know, businesses and developing where we are, so we can live like kings and queens. Trevor is saying, for my World Cup fans, fun fact, did you know that Haiti had to change their jerseys because the first one showed them holding up a flag taking their independence? Wow. FIFA said it was political. Yeah. But is it true that talk about race and color and privilege in the Caribbean? When I look at the Haitian team, weren't they more light skinned? Did you have lots of dark skinned people on the Haitian football team? Could you answer me, guys? Based on what I saw, many of them, if not all of them, were light-skinned Haitians. Wigs were used, Michelle is saying, by African peoples before the transatlantic slave trade or Egypt. Okay, I got you. Yes. So it means, therefore, that we're connecting back to that. And I would not be surprised. I think fashions come and go, right? So yeah, I'm not surprised if wigs were actually used in Africa. Now, Z saying, but it's serious, as a serious industry here. Why are we? But who is making the wigs? And that's the question. Who is making the wigs? Are Africans making the wigs, or is it the Chinese making the wigs? And that's the question we need to ask ourselves. It's not just the wearing of wigs too. It's who owns that industry. That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Z saying that conversation yesterday was wonderful. So big question, was Marx right? Is violent revolution the answer and not Fabian socialism? Very good question. I am not for violence, because at the end of the day, when we say violence, sometimes the system cannot be rebuilt, right? Who is going to rebuild? If you say violence and you have a vision to rebuild, right, then I would say maybe, perhaps. But I don't think it's going to work if we burn down the entire system and then there's nothing to replace it. Sometimes it gets worse too, and never ever will be rebuilt. So yeah, it depends. It depends on. It's a very hard question to ask. I would say let nature take its course. If you're trying to push something and to push for transformation, and they're not trying to do it, and they're attacking you, then you might have to do it. Because guess what? The system is violent. The system is violent, you know. So I think even though I'm not pro-violence, I think the system is going to go down violently, because it is a violent system, right? And violence begets violence. So that's my take. Not a violent person. I don't promote violence in any way, in any capacity, in any shape or form. But because the system is violent, I have to be practical that it is going to have to go down violently. It's sad, but it's true. Trevor is saying, yes, Haiti and Louisiana is synonymous, and many parts of Brazil as well. Yes, and Brazil is a case in and of itself. Wherever all this race and class and that we're talking about, check Brazil, and you'll see that we have a lot to learn from Brazil. Sunflower is saying, I see racism go always. Racism is another word developed by the elites to divide us. It's definitely working, because we are still seeing and talking the color of skin, no winning the fight. And what we're saying, Sunflower Jam, here is that, yes, often when we talk about racism, we look at our neighbors, those whom we can see as the problem. What we fail to talk about are the persons who control the system of racism, the same ones who say they are dividing us, but yes, they are the ones using it to divide us, but we have to dethrone them, right? Until we dethrone the ruling class, the ruling elites, then we'll always have the system as it is, because it's not going to be the person at your school or your neighbor that is going to be, that person, not your enemy. That is not your enemy. So when you're looking at the person beside you as the enemy, that person not your enemy, is the ruling elites. Andrew, all the presidents are related. Yes, they're all related. They're all related, and it is intentional. It is, and it's the same thing we're talking about, guys, in the Caribbean, that these prime ministers are selected, right? And then we elect them, right? They might not be related as the US presidents are, as Trevor is saying, but they are selected because they have to belong to to the ruling elites. They have to be closely connected to the ruling elites and what the ruling elites want for the country. Now, Z is saying that conversation yesterday was wonderful. So big question. I think I've read this before. Yes, I think I've answered the question, Z. We like symbolism. Absolutely. That is what we stand for, symbolism. Obama is also black 1 minute and the next he's biracial. Well, that is because the society, the powers that be want to make him into the biracial. But before, when he was running for presidency, he was defined as black, right? The first black president, the first black this, and the first black that, because that was the only way he could be framed. One of the things that we have to understand, that America and its media they are about framing things to sell. It's all about selling to an audience, right? In the same way they sell Kamala to the Indian population as Asian, and then they sell her to her black people as blacks. And let's not forget that. Kamala was sold also to her Indian people as being Asian. Remember now that you have the Indians are very wealthy in the United States and they have some amount of power. Okay, so yes, she had to be sold to both, and that is why they did that. I don't think they just wanted her, she wanted to be both, but they also had to sell her to both population and demographics so that she could win the election. Okay, she could not just go and say she's black, because she would not be able to connect with the people there, the Indians and the Asians in America. So it's all about framing and selling and marketing, and that is what the United States is about. It's not about people. It's not people-centered. It's about selling a product to you, including the US president or vice president. Okay, and we fall for it. We fall for it because it's all about buying votes, impressing people that you are this or you're that, when you're neither. You're none of them. Do you think that Kamala or Biden or President Obama, do you think they were there to represent you and to make your life better? No. So why would you think that their color or their race is important? Because it should not be that their color or their race matters. It should be that they are genuinely wanting to improve the lives of the people, and their economic policies are going to improve the lives of all Americans, and they are going to have less wars around the world, right? But we are so caught up now that we just want to look at the superficial race and, oh, he's black, so I'm voting for him. She's Indian, so I'm going to run and vote for her. And that has nothing to do with anything of a president, okay? And that is where the superficiality of race in America, in the world at large, is something, and the Caribbean, we need to take serious look at. Correct. That's why classism is a problem, because it's a club you can get in once you're willing to compromise, because even if you get lucky with a gold spoon, they keep a clear margin between them and you. They always, because the system is rigged. The system is, guys, is rigged. There's no way to describe it, but it is so, right? Trevor is saying correct. When they see you, the top drop rule is then, or the one drop rule, sorry, then is then personified. Then we have here Knight is saying, Stephen Knight, yeah, they don't want some of these folks coming back home, especially the ones who are going to empower others. And it doesn't matter how much money you have, you cannot go around buying up land. Absolutely. They don't want us back there. They don't want these Caribbean masses there. They don't want them back there, because they know that they're going to become what? Disruptors of the system. Remember now that when Marcus Garvey went back to Jamaica, he was too powerful. This loud mouth that was so world renowned, they had to get him out. He had to run. He had to flee Jamaica because he just could not be there, because he's going to be a disruptor of what is happening there. He's going to be talking about anti-colonialism. He's going to be talking about how the British colonized and enslaved people there in Jamaica and the Caribbean and around the world. So they could not have him there. And they made his life a living hell until he had to run. He had to flee Jamaica and headed to Great Britain, where he died, right? In a predominantly Black culture. Now, Trevor is saying, my earliest memories, 45 years old, I can remember children making fun of the darkest child in class, and it goes right through until college. And let's remember our families. When you have families, right, in the Caribbean, you know, again, we have different parents, and some parents might be light and some parents might be on the dark side, like myself. And when you have the children and you have different hues, when children begin to quarrel, to have arguments, that is one of the things they say, you're black like, you know, monkey, right? Or you're black like midnight or something of the sort. Right? And one of the things they would say in Jamaica when they would say, okay, well, black is beauty and red is corruption, right? Did you see that in Barbados too and in Trinidad? You know, in response, people of my complexion would say to people who say that black is, you know, you're ugly and you're black, and would say black is beauty and red is corruption, right? So from even from the family level, at the familial level, we see that children also begin at birth, sometimes at 5 years old, 6 years old, begin to curse you and say you're black light, because that is what they learned from the parents. And I've seen families where you have light complected and darker complected, and the parents tend to privilege also, give more, you know, attention, pay more attention to the lighter hue, the children of lighter hue, lighter complected children, and that happens within the family. Right, within the immediate family with mother and father. So imagine what's going to happen outside of the family, outside of the home. Okay, but Z saying, but don't we need to express the highest faith in our legal system? The British legal system is corrupt. Historically, the Privy Council is deeply linked to slavery and colonialism, and that is a very important point. And I see your argument, but I think also our system is corrupt. Two, I'm just saying, yes, here you have two corrupt systems. I would rather that I have a choice, which one I would prefer. And I think that's what I'm saying. Just give me the choice. Just like going to North America to study. Yes, it's corrupt there too, and they have some situations where they will keep you down, especially if you're doing something or saying something that they don't want to say. But the fact of the matter is that give me the option of studying and getting my PhD somewhere else. And the same thing with my justice. The Caribbean is too interconnected. Everybody knows everybody. So all the judges know the ones in Jamaica and Trinidad and Guyana, and they all talk. It's a club. It's a club, right? And that is what I'm saying. And I see them at UE, and everybody knows each other from the other campuses. And, you know, so how are you going to be able to get your PhD or get justice? You're not going to get it. You know, you probably, in rare times you might, but in many cases you're not going to get it. And what if you're going up against one of the ruling elites of the Caribbean? You're definitely going to get it, you know. So give me that US, well, not US, the Privy Council just as an option, not because it might not be corrupt too, you know, but I just want to have the choice. That's what I'm saying. Have both. And we have, I know myself is saying, reparations, although a moral issue for all purpose, is dead due to the wars and the economic conflicts. It's not dead because I know myself, as I was saying before you came on, maybe you weren't on when I was saying it, it's now linked, I know myself, it's now linked to climate change. So it's not dead. They're still going to they're going to get the reparations, only that it is not going to be what you think it was designed to do. It's designed for climate change and not for, you know, to improve the lives of Black people of African descent, right? That is what it is. And you're going to call my name. You're going to call my name when it happens. That when it does happen, they're going to have reparations. It's only that it will not be for people of African descent. It's going to be used for their climate change agenda. Now, we have Stephen Knight to say, what the hell does climate change got to do with reparations? Well, that's a good thing. What the hell does, you know, Stephen, does, you know, LGBTQ have to do with race, right? But they have conflated. They have conflated sexual orientation and a sexual preference with a race. You know, a race that has diversity in terms of people, you know, are heterosexuals, people are, you know, Trinidadian and Ghanaians and whomever they are, right? You can't conflate, you know, a sexual orientation with race, and that is what they've done. So it's not that it makes sense, it's what they're doing, and people just have to understand that's how they don't do what makes sense. They do what is convenient for them, and what will give them power. All right, but it doesn't make any sense. You're right. You're right. It does not make any sense that they're conflating climate change. But if they did not do that, how would they get so much money? They were not going to give us trillions and millions of dollars. Come on. In this time, you think they're going to do that? When everybody, including white people, are, you know, barely surviving, they're going to give us trillions of dollars? They're not going to do it. All right. So if they say they're going to do it tomorrow, it's going to go directed towards another agenda, which is the climate change agenda. And the climate change agenda, by the way, is control, right? Economic, political, and social cultural control. Now, Trevor is saying loads of time to break you in one way or another. So being a sellout or getting into crime, sex, drugs will suffice for the cool card. Absolutely. I know myself is saying climate change is the ultimate grift. It's wealth transfer in disguise. Absolutely. And this is what I'm saying. The climate change, and I'm thankful for Miss Mia Martley of Barbados. She said it very clearly. And I read it to you, word for word. Word for word, I read it. It was not from me. She said that the climate change, that the reparations is synonymous with climate change, right? So it means, therefore, that they're going to conflate climate change with Black people reparations, and that is what they're doing. I never trusted them that they were going to give people when Haiti should be now. If they were, let us say that all the funds that they got after the Haiti, you know, earthquake in 2010, if they had rebuilt Haiti, I probably would have some belief in them. But nothing that these people have ever done, right, have ever helped people in any sense. Jamaica recently had Hurricane Melissa, right, and they weren't helped. Billions of dollars sent there, and they also weren't helped. So when are we going to wake up people to see that what they say is not what they mean, and superficially? I don't understand. You know, that's what I'm here for. Every day is the same thing, and we're just not waking up to understand that their agenda is not what they say. It's something entirely different. Now, greetings, welcome, Pedro Jamat. Now join and hearing the reparations grift. Yeah, it is a grift. Reparations is one big distraction. I think I want to invite a guest. If you know, or any of you, a guest that I can invite to talk about reparations, any person, you know, just to have them give us understanding of what this agenda is about, please let me know in the chat so we can invite that person and we can have that live discussion, because this is something we need to talk about. So maybe it could be a live this week where we need to talk about the reparation agenda. Reparations is one big distraction used for political points, Andrew. Very good. The one shouting the hardest will be seen as a savior by their blind followers. Yes. And we know, as I'm saying, that they've told us what it's about. Andrea Crawford is saying exactly, they're not going to give reparations. They're not. And they're going to give it, but not give it to what we think we are going. Just like they give money for hurricane relief, right? And they gave money to Haiti for earthquake relief. But did they use the money for what it was, well, they told us it would have been for? No. Right? So what makes us believe that the reparations was going to go to you and I to build houses and hospitals and, you know, clinics, whatever. Now, I know myself. Now, let me say something to you too. The elites are very crafty and cunning. They perhaps will give a few people. They might go and give me a motley and give some other people, you know, like the political elites, some money. And then they say, well, they gave us some money. But there's as a select few that they gave it to the same elites and the ones who control power. And then they say, you can't say, just like they did to Obama. Obama became president. And then they say, don't talk about racism anymore because, you know, we actually made one of you guys. We made a Black person to become president. And you're now living in the post-racial era. And that is what they do. They like to, you know, we can't allow them to deceive us, ladies and gentlemen. They're crafty and they're cunning. I know myself says, truth is that elites, and welcome, I know myself. I haven't seen you for a long, long time. You've just vacated, and many of you have left. I don't know where you were, if you are getting notification, but I remember your handle. Truth is that the elites in the US and elsewhere will likely use the people in the Caribbean as fodder in the war against Venezuela and South America, just like Ukraine against Russia. Absolutely. And that's exactly what is happening. And you're making the points, right? And then we have, I know myself correct, and that's one purpose of it. Absolutely. And then we have Pedro saying, Pedro Hill, okay, you're hailing up somebody. Stephen Knight is saying the idea that, Z saying to Stephen Knight, the idea that slavery created abysmal living conditions and conditioned people to live in such conditions in one of the world's most naturally volatile regions. Yes, and that is true. And then we have, I know myself, Trinidad will ultimately be a forward operating base, and Caribbean people, due to economic despair, will go and fight. I think we will have no other, we call it now, option, because if they, just like the United States, if they begin to have the conscription sort of mandate or rule law, it means therefore that we have to go. So that's what the United States is about to do. Remember now that Trump is going to reinstitute the conscription law that Americans, I guess 18 or over might have to go and will have to go to fight in American wars. So the Caribbean, if the United States institutes that policy or reinstitutes it, they are going to do that in the Caribbean too. So your children might be forced, just like they were in World War II, to go to war. Okay? And I did tell you that in previous videos, okay? I did tell you that in previous videos, and it's going to happen. I know myself saying, our leaders are stupid, lacking backbones, and voters are even more stupid because we keep voting for them. Yet again, because we're talking about class and race and power and privilege in the Caribbean. And if you notice, many of our elites too, even our political elites are tied to that sort of institutionalized racism, institutionalized colorism, right? And that is what we're seeing happening here in the Caribbean. Okay, that is what is happening. In fact, in the 1990s in Jamaica, there was a prime minister, and I will not call his name on the show, but he's dark as I am, and he said that he was the Fresh Prince, right? And he fooled many Jamaicans who believed, because he was the first person in the history of Jamaica to have been a dark-skinned politician. Most of them were light-skinned, right? Politicians. So when he came there now, he fooled the people. And he was the same one who was responsible for taking away and destroying black businesses. The same black dark-skinned man who said that he was there to liberate his people was the same ones that the elites used to have destroyed black-owned, black domestic businesses. Okay? Now, Z saying living conditions for slaves in the Caribbean were grounded in poor building standards that resulted in centuries of death from hurricanes. Now, I like what you're saying here, and I'm happy you raised the point. I am seeing where Jamaica, I'm not sure about Guyana, but I'm seeing Jamaica, for example, building homes that they say are weather resilient, right? What I see there in Jamaica of these new houses that they're building are boxes, and the hurricanes are going to actually blow them down in 1 second. So when they're telling us about this hurricane resilience and climate resilience, it has nothing to do with that. In fact, they're building homes there that are even weaker than the homes that were built in former times. This is how these people are coming. When I look at the homes in Jamaica, the ones built by the NHT, the National Housing Trust, they're not impressive. And they're so low on soil that will erode in no time. I don't know. I don't know when they talk about this climate resilience. It has nothing to do with any climate resilience. In fact, their homes are going to be blown away, unfortunately, but that is the truth. I know myself, look at Trinidad now operating behind a currency shield that is a currency prison. We're all it's all happening to us. And, a lot of what Trinidadians are going through, Jamaicans have been going through that from the 1960s. I've always said, say what you want to say about other Caribbean nations like Trinidad, but at least you guys have had some prosperity since independence. unfortunately, Jamaica has really not had any number of years of prosperity, if any, post-independence. Okay? And that's the thing. And when I talk about prosperity, I'm talking about the majority of the people. People will say prosperity during the 60s in Jamaica because it was for the few, the selected few. But it was not for the majority. Okay? But at least the Trinidadians had, to some degree, some level, and had developed a very large middle class. Now, Pedro Jamati is saying Fabian's symbol is a wolf in sheep clothing. Yeah, all of them are. But, you know, we have to use something that is, what do you think is going to be the model? What would be our economic model? Because, you know, it's great to criticize other models like Marxism and Fabian socialism and what capitalism, but what would be our economic model? We have to write it, you know, and practice it. And it has to be successful for us to be able to say we can just, you know, throw out everything like capitalism or socialism or communism. Now, personally, Z is saying, I can see the link. Imagine a slave during a great hurricane, which probably was a Cat 5, no proper housing and absolutely no medical care in the aftermath. Now, my thing, Z, that what they should do, develop our economies. We don't want any help from them if we don't have to, right? And that's the whole point, that they're thinking that they're our parents or fathers, right? Or daddies. Now, we want help when help needs to be had. And that's make the majority of the populace independent and create the economy so we can be able to help ourselves and our neighbors helping their fellow neighbors, right? But our governments are too corrupt for us to depend on them. Lots of times we know they don't help. You know, and you know when hurricane comes, most of the time it is your neighbor and your families that help. Most of the times the government help, you wait for them, it's going to come too late when you've died. Then we have, I know myself is saying Caribbean were tricked. We do not have countries, we have satellites. And that is true. I like the word you use here, satellites, because we are US satellites. It's not that we are free. We have satellites because when the US, UK, Brussels speak, we lay down every time. Couldn't have said it better. Then we have the Steve Knight is saying the system is violent, right? And that's why it has to come down violent. I'm not pro-violence, but just like slavery was violent, and it came down violently. When you read what happened in Haiti, what happened in Barbados, in Jamaica, and these countries, the slaves rose up and they had to do what they had to do in the United States, right? So the system was violent. So you want violence? Well, you get violence. And that's what people said. And they actually destroyed many of the planters, particularly in Haiti. Now, Andrea Crawford is saying, I heard that PM Dr. Andrew Holness plans to send to King Charles in September regarding reparations. Nigel Farage says it is the prime ministry did that he will ban people from the Caribbean coming to England. Now, do you know that Prime Minister Andrew Holness can say anything because David Cameron, when we were talking about reparations in 2000, was it 15 thereabout, that he went to the Jamaican Parliament and he told them to forget about what happened in slavery, right? I don't think King Charles is going to change. And we know that King Charles and the monarchy is involved with some of this Epstein thing, well, at least Prince Andrews. And if you study the British monarchy and the whole matter of child sacrifice and all these things, the British monarchy is not a real institution, guys, and we know what they did to Diana. So we can't trust these people, right? These people are not morally upright people, right? They speak very nice. King Charles is very eloquent, and when he speaks, you want to listen to him for the entire night, right? Very well spoken, right? And he knows how to capture his audience and stuff like that. So good for him. But we can't be deceived by their wonderful rhetoric, can we? Now, Pedro Jamati is saying you better deal with self because dethroning is an utopia. Well, you know, the planters, Pedro, they never thought that they were defeatable. They thought that the system would never have come down. They thought that Black people were so stupid, the slaves were so unintelligent that they would not even have thought to have dethroned them and to have destroyed the system. But it happened. When people get tired of a system, and have you ever seen somebody who looks simple and that person looks like you can beat them up and you can exploit them and take advantage of them? And the more you do it, sometimes they're patient and they will smile and they'll laugh and they pretend as if they can't fight back. And when they are tired, you see them change into a monster, right? That can make you, or will make you run if you will escape. So yeah, let's not also underestimate. And even though sometimes I do by saying that they're going to win, let's not underestimate people when they become very angry, right? They can get vicious, right? We know people can get vicious when you take advantage of them for too long. Now we have, I know myself is saying dark, light-skinned Creole. Yes, that's what they call the mixture of Europeans and Africans, the Creole, Chinese. No matter what, when we get forced to fight stupid wars or do something that is not in our interest, it doesn't matter. We will all die together, right? But may I say that there's still some hope that people will rise up. When they're tired, they will rise up. Don't underestimate that. Now, the Haitian World Cup team was more TV friendly. They did not look like barbecue, but the bad jersey definitely made the statement clear. Correct. And the color too, as you're saying, they didn't look like barbecue. They didn't look like the majority of the populace, right? They looked like more mulattoes, Creoles, right? What we call the Los Criollos, the Creoles of Haiti, the mulattoes. Z says, Andrew, that is so true. Our leaders are quietly selected and then we elect them. The process is entirely orchestrated. Absolutely, that is how they do it. And then we say that we elected them, and that's why they never do what we send them there to do, right? Because we never elected them in the first place, right? But they have to do what the leaders tell them to do, the power structures tell them to do. In Barbados, the schools was the same until Barrow took over. Yes. We know that there are some things accomplished in the system. I'm not saying now that this entire system needs to go, right? But we're saying that much of what is in the Caribbean at the higher stages, at the higher echelon of society, the power structure is still the same. But we have seen changes in the schools and in the business places to an extent. What do you mean? Is it Bim Lady? Andre is saying Trump is not here to improve anyone's life. He is the worst. None of them is there to improve anybody's life. They're there to do what the war elites want them to do, right? What the military-industrial complex and they're there to do. They're not there to improve your lives at all, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. With the likely crash of the U.S. dollar, will all this matter? There will be so much turmoil because many currencies in the Caribbean are pegged to the dollar. Color isn't gonna mean anything. That's a very interesting question you're raising. But remember now that the dollar is not going to replace another dollar, another currency. The currency is going to be, as we know, what do you call it now? The CBDCs, the digital currency, right? We're moving into the digitalization of the currencies. So they're not replacing it with another dollar, whether it's going to be the euro or the yuan, the Chinese yuan. They're going to replace it with the digital currency. So they're literally trying to get rid of it, right? The United States and the global elites wants to get rid of the dollar system so that they can, put us into that digital era. Trevor is saying 4 or 5 years. I remember it clearly. And Z is, I know myself is saying in an economic pressure situation, dark man with money will be pretty and light-skinned man with no money will be attractive. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes that is true, sometimes that is true. One of the things about life too is that, and Italians, for example, if you look at Italians, they will go to Africa and where you have dark-skinned women and other countries in the Caribbean. And they will walk with her and they will, sleep with her, whatever. But they will say that, when they're going back home and if they want to marry someone, they don't want that dark-skinned person. They're just staying with her to shack up, right? And to for sexual appeal, right? That is what they do. Now, these things, I see what you mean with the Privy Council, Andrew. You mean having a choice, an option. Yes, I just want the option because, people must be, the Caribbean is too corrupt, right? And just like we have option to educate ourselves, those who want to go to the Caribbean Court of Appeal, fine with me. And I don't have anything against them in terms of their qualification and their ability, their capacity to dispense justice. I know they can. They are bright, just like anybody coming out of Britain. But what I do know is that we are too connected and there's just too much sort of familiarity, which breeds contempt, by the way. Bim Lady is saying, remember St. Winfred was white-only school when Barrow was prime minister? He has no more white schools, right? And that was an era from the 50s and the 60s, if that was in the Barbados. The same thing happened in Jamaica also, where you had schools which could only be attended by white or very high mulatto students. Black students could not attend. And you have the father of Michael Manley was one of them who stopped it and said, no, this cannot continue. You're going to have to mix students, and if they get the common entrance, that they should be able to get into some of these elite schools. Pedro Jamat is saying, so if you think that about justice, what would you say about economic? Since parliamentary independence allowed economic oversight. That's an interesting, is it oversight? Economic shenanigans, sorry. Economic shenanigans. That's an interesting question that you're asking here, because when there are people now in Jamaica, Pedro Jamat, who are asking, do you know that even in recent polls, many Jamaicans are saying that they would prefer to be under British colonial rule than under independent Jamaica? That is a sad state of affairs, even though British colonialism was very, very harsh and many of us were illiterate, right? But what would make them, what would convince them now, most people in Jamaica, over 60% of the populace, that would prefer to be under British colonialism than being under independent Jamaica run by Jamaican politicians? It is something that we have to think about. I am sure it's no easy answer, right? And we can't tell people that they're stupid too. We have to also look carefully at the system. Some of us are not suffering as some people are suffering. And there are people who think that there was more order in Jamaica. The roads were better paved under British colonialism. And they just thought that, they could go to a hospital or a dentist and get some free, probably health care. And, and now they probably can't do that, right? So they're wondering, did independence free us, or did it make our lives a living hell, right? These are questions we have to ask as we're now approaching independence in Jamaica and in Trinidad and throughout the Caribbean. Now, with an insult or comparing, Trevor is saying, being born a color to sexual orientation is disgusting. And that's what they're doing, right? That's what they're doing. And that's what they're doing with the climate too, and the reparations. Marie saying the aid sent to Haiti was siphoned off. Yes. And the same thing is going to do for the climate change. There's no, guys, it's the writing is on the wall. When we know that the clouds are dark, right? And we can smell the rain, we know it's going to rain. There's going to be a shower of rain. We have been seeing clouds, right? Ominous clouds in the sky by these elites, and we know that the clouds are dark, they're black, right? So why do we think that we're going to get prosperity and they're going to give us lots of money and give us money to invest in healthcare? They're not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. So our reparations, I know myself is saying, will be everyone getting an is it EV? They will assign obligations to ownership and will cause what little we own to be taken back. Absolutely. It's going to be controlled system. It could be that they're going to give us what they call it, the loans could be, the reparations could be the universal income, right? Remember now, that's what they're moving to, that all of us will be getting a universal wage. So this is what you get. And let us say that in Trinidad, it is like $100 Trinidad TNT dollars, or 200, 300 per month. Then that is what everybody gets. So it could be that is what they're going to use it for too, right? Lots of things we have to think about. But it's not going to be given to us to rebuild us and to make us become, kings and queens and economically equal to the ruling class and other races. They're not going to do it that way. Marie saying the aid sent to Haiti was siphoned off into strange hands. It went into the NGOs, by the way, and many of it and much of it wasn't sent in the first place. It was given to people like the Bill Clintons and these oligarchs, and the remain went into the hands of the NGOs, right? So much of it did not even leave where it came from. The PPP loans situation in lockdown showed what most people would do with so-called reparations, right back to every other color. Why am I not seeing the screen well today? The other color and debt to them. Yes, you're correct. And then we have here the BIM lady saying, yes, he did. I left Barbados in 1967, January 2 months after independence. Right. So that would have been when they changed that system. I know myself that I had some work to catch up on. And oh yeah, I see what you're saying. I haven't seen you for a long time. So some of you think, get PJ Patterson to tell you about reparations. Yeah, he's the one who is pushing for it, but you know that he is a part of the corruption of that class. Okay, I heard he was a great leader. You mean PJ Patterson? Or it was the Barbadian Prime Minister. He induced the free education, even the university. Yes, many of them at that time, the Manleys, the Barrows, right, and also the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, they believed in free education up to university level. His party exchanged it. Now the children paid for university. Yes, they wanted us to be free. These leaders at the time wanted us to be free, but our leaders now are not pushing for us to be free. They want us more to go back on the plantation. So we have here, building the houses weaker will play into climate change agenda, so the leaders can get money out of it by using their countrymen and women as expendables. I think so. It's not resilient as they say it should be, if we know what the word resilience means, right? Because they might be using resilience to mean another thing, and we think it means what it should mean. Or they say Grantley Adams did more than Barrow. Did he? I would never, somebody's saying, trust a wolf in sheep clothing who wants to go ahead or something. Did you say? Then we have here Bim lady saying, no, my dear, Barrow was the best prime minister Barbados has ever had. Now we have here, going through them quickly, our own sold us, get over it and or keep traumatized. We're not traumatized. We're trying now to unpack what they're doing, but we're not traumatized. And we're trying to let people know that that is what is happening and to, enlighten them. But we know, but many of our people still don't know. Former Jones were defeated, but Napoleon was worse than him. Now we have another coming from Z again. No, it's not. No, I know myself. When the global economic collapse comes, and it's coming, what is our plan for the region? What does rising up mean? Do we know? There's a question. And is the global meltdown already here? Because people are not surviving, and people think that because they see everybody every day and they're probably having loans and using credit cards and getting some remittances. But when the entire system, as he's suggesting, when it collapses, rather, how are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to even maneuver away out of a system that is so exploitative? Now we have Trevor is saying Barrow till this day is still the only thing Barbados always harping on while things become dilapidated. One would think they stopped making brains with sense since he died. And this is what we're saying. The same thing with Michael Manley in Jamaica. People just continue to say Michael Manley, and so was Michael Manley the only good leader Jamaica has ever had? And that's the question people are asking. It's something that we have to think about. What's happening to our leaders? Why are they not, leading in the way that these people led in the past? Now we have Alexis is saying the leaders in our countries are not making change or advancement. They're not. They're not. And why? Because they want to still keep down the black masses and people, the plantation, and to reinstitute the plantation economy. Now, what I can say, Trevor is saying what I can tell you is his vision for a day when not a blade of sugar cane can be found in Barbados was taken literally, and the clowns are stream-rolling all of our lands and unaffordable. We have here, in my opinion, his main failing perhaps was thought as a win at the time when he changed the political setting in order to remove the now PM's grandfather who practiced politics as seen today. It's just, why are we, as he's saying, harping back on what happened in yesteryear? Why can't we now say to our leaders, we have to step up, you have to step up to the plate? Many of them are not doing that, and yet we continue to vote for them and to put them back in position. I know myself says, under English rule, we had housing. Yes, there was housing. They were called slave quarters. What kind of crazy do these free people say sometimes? Yes, and that is something that we have to discuss, because we have to look at the pros and the cons. I think that they're just seeing a level of social decay, and that our leaders, yes, we have probably better housing than we had yesterday, but people just find themselves not connecting with their leaders anymore. They find that the leaders are so wealthy. By the way, let me see if I can pull up the payment that did I save it here? The salaries of our prime ministers. I think I had it on this thing here. And this was an alleged, salary that they earn from Jamaica to Barbados to all of these countries. Let me see if I can put it up on the screen for you to look at and see their salaries, because this is something that this is the society we're talking about. The people are saying they're not surviving, but our politicians are living well, right? So let me put it up on the screen and just show you. It's alleged, but I do not think this is a full lie. I think that to some extent our prime ministers are being overpaid, right? And we just want to have a look at it and to see how the leaders. Let me turn up the volume.
Horrible. How much they pay people in the Caribbean? Horrible. I don't care what Caribbean island you're on. What they pay people out there is horrible. So to even think that y'all are possibly bringing this home and coming in strong as Guyana, why? Top of the list. And underneath there is Turks and Caicos, which I'm kind of not surprised, because Turks and Caicos is a very expensive island. Jesus Christ, deep in your pockets. If you ever go to Turks and Caicos, okay, your money must run long when you touch down in there. But Andrew, Lord God, them always say politician teeth, and you just prove it. And this is what they're saying. Allegedly, you got to only imagine what you got after the little Melissa thing that did happen. How much you done snuck on. You know what I'm saying? Pocket away. And after that, it's Trinidad and Tobago and Jesus, Barbados and Dominican Republic. My thing is that some of them are in the low. But I just feel like anything after 70, you bring it home knowing that what y'all wages out there in the Caribbean is basura. It's kind of like, come on now. Y'all bringing home real dollars, sitting on real money. And yeah, they're in jobs. Trust me, they're in jobs where, you know what I'm saying, you should be compensated well, but you also have to do right by your island. And if this is the real salary that y'all bringing home, and knowing what people are getting paid in the Caribbean, should I shame? Especially you, Andrew, as a Jamaican. Everybody should shame, but Andrew, no man, no go on bad. Allegedly, this is the salary.
Yeah. So do you see, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that these people are getting huge wages, right? Huge salaries, while people are barely surviving. And then they tell us that the economies are very well and that there are jobs, right? When there are no jobs, yet they're being paid in US dollars. And when I look at the minimum wage across the Caribbean, Jamaica is last. $2 per $2, I think 50 cents that they get is the minimum wage in Jamaica. right? And some other Caribbean countries is higher. But when you think about the minimum wage in our countries, while our leaders are getting top salaries, salaries that perhaps people get in first world countries, you must ask yourself the question, are we better under independence? Because certainly for our political class, they're doing well, yet still they get, one of the things I don't like about our politicians, they blame our citizens for not being productive. So they will complain about the teachers, they complain about the nurses, they complain about all civil servants, how we're not properly educated, how we're not properly trained, and we're not ready for the 21st century. Yet still, they are not able to manage the economy in such a way that people there can prosper. Right? And this is what we're saying. This is what people have been saying all over the years, that our politicians are now being like our new colonial masters. They're pocketing huge sums of money, eating up our resources while enslaving our people. Okay, and we have to look at these things. But, we are the ones responsible for that too, because we run after them during their campaigns and we make them feel as if they are celebrities and that we have sent them there to just be celebrities and not to be civil servants. And that is what is happening. Okay, so that was very detestable, as you're saying. I don't know how they make so much money and the people are suffering. And that's why people are saying, are we better off? Jamaicans are asking that they would have preferred. And I think one of the reasons why they prefer also being under British colonialism is that the passport under British colonialism, if they had a British passport, it gives them a sort of leeway into exploring the world more than with their Jamaican passport. So even if they were living in colonial Jamaica, it would make them be able to visit some countries in Europe, more countries in Asia, and around the world in particular, right? So that is what they were saying. So I don't think it just has to mean that they can stay in Jamaica and be successful under British colonialism, but what the passport and what that British colonial identity proffers them. Okay, so it's sad and it might look like they're stupid, but when you look at the full picture, you realize that something is fundamentally wrong, that they're not entirely faulty for saying that, because of the fact our Caribbean societies are gatekeepers and we really want to keep each other down. Remember now, those of you in the Caribbean, remember common entrance. Common entrance was a time when you had to do your exam when you were 10 years old. And if you did not pass your common entrance at 12, I think the latest, then they would say that you're dull and that you can't make it in life because you didn't pass a simple common entrance into an elite school. So we have that plantocracy in the Caribbean that we have to speak about, and it's all about maintaining the class privilege, the color line, right, and the sort of economic powerhouse that the minorities have there. Now, Pedro is saying it's still under British colonialism, but paying their own bill. Right. We're still under British colonialism, but it's an American sort of, form of British colonialism, because, that American colonialism and British, they're cousins. So it's like one thing, the empire, and they're cousins and they're treating us in the same way. And we know that no other country is more color prejudiced than America. The first thing that it looks at when it looks at you, as we've said, is your color. So therefore, everything in the Caribbean is built on color and class, and that determines your privilege. However, we're suggesting too that recently we have new money and people have been able to get education, and some of them were, a few Black people have gotten in, they've gotten closer to the power structure. As a result of that, they have been able to be successful. Now they use these exceptions to the rule and they say, well, you can do it too. Everybody can do it too, when that is not true. It's a lie. But many people have really they swallowed the lie. Trevor saying a robber was beaten severely in Barbados recently and died. Oh my God. Everyone chanted good. Ooh. We have to take back the country. But a politician was allowed to resign with $6 million dollars and change missing and welcomed home. And that is the contradiction. That is a contradiction. The people that we see who are the, what we call them, white collar criminal, whatever you want to call them, these are the people who are stealing more than the man. Not that we are actually saying this man should have stolen. What we're saying is the whole inconsistencies and the contradictions in our society, that we want to discipline the man on the street for stealing, but we don't want to discipline, we refuse to discipline the person who is at the high social rank because he's wearing jacket and tie, right, and speaks a certain way, is a graduate of the London School of Economics, right, or Oxford University or Harvard. So it means, therefore, that that person should be given a blight, right? Oh, I'm sorry for him. Let's forgive him. Right? We don't see that person in any way, in any negative light. But if somebody steals from you on the streets, you are going to call the police, and that person is going to get the brunt of the law. And this is what we are saying, that we always look at our neighbors, and we want our neighbors to be treated in the most despicable way, yet our politicians, who are not really men and women of integrity, we still continue to praise them, and we wish the best for them, and we don't want them to be jailed and to be imprisoned, right? And we take up for them. And this is what we have to do. We've got now to say our leaders should not be celebrities. Our leaders must be leaders of service, because that's what they were sent there to do. If they don't want the job, you know what I hear people saying, and including some prime ministers in Jamaica. Oh, we could have been at a better place. They're saying, oh, I graduated with my degree. I could have gone to work for Wall Street, or, well, go to work for Wall Street. If you think that, Barbados is not the place you should run because you think you're so bright and, you're so powerful, go and work for Wall Street. Don't be Prime Minister of Barbados or Prime Minister of Trinidad, right? We're not saying you have that option not to be Prime Minister. Just like the doctor or the nurse have the option of not being a doctor, right? And some of them are not earning lots of money in the world, but they regard the profession, that's the profession that they chose, right? And they continue to enjoy that profession, not because it's paying them a lot, but because that's the profession they chose and they remain in it. So if you want to be prime minister, don't tell me about you can make billions of dollars or millions of dollars on Wall Street, because that is beyond the point. You chose it. So you understand the service. It's not a private sector. It's not the private sector. It's a public sector, or it should be, but it's no longer a public job. It's more of a private corporate job. Now, Stephen Knight is saying, blame us, but they are the reason why we have low incomes and why our living situations are the way they are. The politicians are the ones who signed on to all the dotted line. Absolutely, and you're right. But, one of the things about it too, we have to read between the lines, look at what they say, look at the trends in our country. And I've seen, for example, in Jamaica, where the politician Andrew Holness, he just has deceived the people. And 1 p.m., they want him alone because he's building some buildings, and the buildings don't belong to Jamaicans, right? They belong to foreign investors who are exploiting Jamaicans. But the fact of the matter is that they still want him because they don't want to look at the policies and the fact that they can't afford the cost of living. But as soon as Andrew Holness gives them some spoils, some economic spoils, right, then they love it and they jump up for him and they vote for him. So yes, I think that it is both that we have to be blamed too, and they, because we should demand more of them. For example, in Jamaica, you have most of our roads are pot-ridden, right? They're pothole-ridden. The roads in Jamaica are horrible, and it's internationally known. I'm not the one telling. It's just everybody goes there and says the same thing. Now, why would you put a prime minister back into office? Before he goes back into office, I would say, until you fix the roads, I won't be voting for you. And in that case, he would be what? Forced to fix the roads. Until you fix the hospitals, I won't be voting for you. Until you fix the schools, I won't be voting for you. So they would understand. But a lot of times we allow them to say, okay, after the elections, we have earmarked money for the roads, we have earmarked money for the hospitals. And when they do win the elections, you hear nothing more about what they said they were going to do. and then you just complain again and say, wow, they said, and you curse and you carry on. We have to behave better than that. We have to be smarter than they are, but we tend to fall for their deceits, right? And their craftiness and cunningness. So that is what we have to understand. Then we have here Z saying, and those politicians have children and grandchildren who are brazen criminals and gangsters, and the electorate knows that. They do. And it's surprising to say that they get away with everything that they do. And they send them abroad. They send them if they have, if they're engaged in any criminal activity. I know this very top Jamaican elite, he and his son were involved in some illegal stuff some years ago. And guess where his son is living now? In the States, right? Son is living in the States. Because they can get, and that's what I'm saying, our local law and our politicians, they're so connected, the economy with the justice system, with the politicians, everything is so interconnected and interlocked that sometimes it's very difficult to get justice in Jamaica, in Trinidad, and in the Caribbean. Very difficult. Very difficult. And you might not I don't like him, Vybz Kartel, but I am sure if it had been left up to the Caribbean Court of Justice and Jamaican Supreme Court, Vybz Kartel would be probably killed. And I'm not a Vybz Kartel, fan. I don't even like his music. I don't even listen to them in the first place. I'm just telling you that, we have to be careful. We must have an option, because sometimes when people don't like us, right, and because they're so interlocked and interconnected, you can get some justice. I'm not even sure if Vybz Kartel hasn't moved from Jamaica to go to the States, because he probably is fearful of his life, because it is what it is. It is what it is, right? Trevor is saying, yes, Andrew, but are telling the citizens, if we don't like how they have destroyed the country, we should leave while they stay and be at home refugees in our own country. Right, that's what they're literally telling us to do. So in Jamaica every year, I don't know about Barbados, 80% of the graduates leave. I don't know about Trinidad. I think I've learned from Trinidad also that many of the graduates in Trinidad, university graduates, are leaving for greener pastures abroad. So most of the educated class in Jamaica, for example, you go to Jamaica now, it's almost like it's filled with illiteracy. Why? Because most of the educated masses leave the country for greener pastures abroad, right? And what is so sad about it, and I saw the minister the other day, the Minister of Health, Dr. Tofton, Christopher Tofton, he was saying that he is importing, nurses from Ghana, from the Philippines, from India, from wherever, because he wants to make the Jamaican, medical, infrastructure multicultural. Now, what does multiculturalism have to do with people's ability to survive in Jamaica? It has nothing to do with anything, right? But according to him, his agenda is to make the medical ecosystem in Jamaica multicultural. Why? Now, the majority of our doctors and nurses in Jamaica are leaving, and they are being recruited every year by Canada, the United States, right, and other countries. But you're going to hear them, oh, well, our nurses are not properly trained, or teachers are not, and this is what they're doing. They're always using some justification to say that they can't do what they're sent to office to do. And that's sad. Now, the election would then be decided by party members and ignorant people. Well, guess what? That's what they see us as, ignorant people, and they are the actual, intelligent ones. I think most of the elections are fixed. They are. It's rigged. It's rigged, and I don't think right now that they care. Yes, please hit the like button and share the live with as many people so that we can beat the algorithm. Our thing is to beat the algorithm, get people on the live so we don't need a system to share it. We get the people on live so that the system, it can beat whatever, shadow banning is happening here on YouTube. Now we have stateless, don't forget, a threat was made if you didn't acquire a Trident ID. We want to talk about the whole ID between Barbados and Guyana. I want to talk about that because that is something very important to talk about, and how that is going to impact Barbadians and Guyanese, and how that in some cases also can help to the little jobs that are there for Barbadians or for Guyanese, how that can disrupt that sort of program there. So people are going to be without jobs because they're going to say, well, if that person can come from Guyana and, and get less paid or less payment, then they are going to take that person over the Barbadian. So we can see very clearly that that is what they are doing. That is what they're doing. And their agenda is not a pretty one. Their agenda is not to take care of us. Their agenda is to make us feel as if we are incompetent and they are the competent ones. And my question to you and to them, if you are the competent one, the political class, if they are the competent ones, why don't they create great economies that grow and that are productive? But then they'll blame you and say, oh, well, you are not that productive. You are uneducated. You are not well skilled. And that is how they use these things. It's psychology that they're using to say that you are not what you think you are. So we have to wake up now in the Caribbean. And I know that we don't like to talk about these things. I know that these things are uncomfortable. I know that we prefer to be entertained and we like to gossip. But at the end of the day, these things are not going to help us. We have to wake up to see that a system is rigged against all of us. All of us, whether you are Trinidadian or you're Jamaican or you're Guyanese or wherever you find yourselves, the system is rigged against us. Threat gone in legislation, wakey. Yes, and stuff like that. All right, any other questions? What do you think is an appropriate topic for tomorrow? We could talk about in tomorrow's discussion. Wasn't bad, wasn't great today in terms of the numbers, but was great in terms of the conversation. Excellent, exceptionally good conversation with us on this live tonight. What is amazing, guys, is how the algorithm is so inconsistent, because with all of the comments that you have had here, the live is so interactive. Most of you have stayed on the live for the most part. Why isn't the algorithm pushing out the content to the streamers? It doesn't want to do so. Isn't it amazing? And then we have the Trevor saying, sounds just like Barbados politicians all over the stage as their greed fuels crime and insanely high cost of living. They tell citizens it is the same like this all over the world. People just accept it. By the way, have you made the connection, ladies and gentlemen, between crime and violence in the Caribbean? That has been our reality for many years, particularly in Jamaica. Well, Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados are now finding themselves in what Jamaica has lived all over the years. That's a crime problem. But the fact of the matter is that if you connect the dots with crime and violence and the wars in the United States, it's the same. So what we find is that wars in the States are profitable, right? So the elites are not going to stop them. It fuels their economy. It fuels the amount of money, right, that they make. It adds to their wealth. So the same thing in the Caribbean, crime and violence pay, right? So they're not going to stop it. It's a part of the economic ecosystem, infrastructure. So it pays to kill, right? Because you're going to have to have weapons to kill. And what are they killing over? Drug territory. So you have to be pushing more drugs, right? So these are the things we have to watch. So they're not going to solve the crime problem. They're not going to stop the wars that are being waged around the world, because all of these things are lucrative. Are we seeing the connection here? So there's a connection between the empire and the so-called Caribbean states here in the Americas and Latin American states as well. So this is what we have. Let me see the comment here because we're coming down. The politicians in the Caribbean are following the blueprint in the big countries with far less chances of reproof and justice against them. Absolutely. We want to be like other countries. We want to be like America. We want to have skyscrapers like America. We want to have these fancy cars like America. We want to have all these. And at the end of the day, nothing is wrong with that if we control these things. right? If we control the fancy cars and making them, if we were manufacturing them, right? If we were also creating wealth and being productive, nothing is wrong with that, because everybody wants to live a nice life, but we're living a nice life on criminality and paper money, right? Everybody's investing into with stock market and all of that stuff, right? And we don't have productive wealth. And if we don't have productive wealth coming from productive industries, the Caribbean is going to be a poor place forever. Pedro is saying most politicians are lawyers, so work is needed. Yeah, and lawyers for doing what? Like Dubai, if you please. Right. We're just penal system, by the way. We're just a colony, and it's sad, but it is what we are. I leave you with this this little thing here where they were saying Punta Cana, which you have heard about, has become one of the most desirable destinations in the Caribbean for tourists, investors, remote workers, and retirees. Its pristine beaches, modern infrastructure, and world-class amenities attract thousands of newcomers every year. But as the region grows, a sensitive topic has quietly emerged: classism. At Cana Blue Real Estate, we believe in honest, responsible conversations that help our buyers understand both the opportunities and the reality of living or investing in Punta Cana. Social context matters for sustainable growth, for respectful integration, and for long-term investment success. Now, those of you who know Punta Cana, you know that it's in Bávaro, in the Dominican Republic, but it is a very poor place in the DR. So what you have is that you have these high-end tourist, very high-end and luxurious tourist, hotels, and then in the community of Bávaro, you have poor people, working class Dominicans running around, right? And people say, wow, Punta Cana is so luxurious and whatever, but what is happening in the DR, the people in Punta Cana, which is just an area of Bávaro, they want to separate it and say Punta Cana is different from Bávaro because Bávaro is just, it's working class. We don't want to be, associated with these people, these local people, just like what they do in Jamaica for the most part. Our hotel industry is built on all-inclusive. So people go to all-inclusive hotels and then they stay behind the walls and they say they're enjoying Jamaica, but that's not Jamaica. Jamaica is going around the country and living and meeting and mix and mingling with the people, right? But they don't want that to happen because they know that the poverty is too great and they want to so-called protect the tourists from any, body from the plantation who want billionaires, right? And then to have some slaves working for them. Right? That is what Dubai is all about. So I don't know what we think because we see some high-rise buildings in Dubai. We think that Dubai is a place where the Caribbean should be modeled after that system when we shouldn't. Same thing in Barbados. They're selling out the land to all the hoteliers, but the hotels are all inclusive. What type of investment or negotiation? And that's exactly what they're doing in Jamaica. Jamaica has always been that slave plantation. Never changed. Never will change. And it is because, again, the minority elites, the brown class, the ones at the top, decide that is how the system should be run. Now, the system is rigged against us because they do not want a bunch of Black people on these islands prospering, hate to bring race into it, but that's what it is. It is. Whether we like it or not, it is. And if it's not race, it's certainly too many dark-skinned people, too many people mixed with melanin should not be involved in having ownership. If you can look at Black Jamaica, where people talk about, Black and blackness and all that stuff. At the end of the day, you had a Black prime minister who was at the helm of uprooting the Black middle class in Jamaica. As the lady wrote, too Black to succeed. Too Black. They're saying she was too Black and all the other Black people of the Black class. And one day I'm going to try to invite her onto the program and she will give you her experience. And she's a very intelligent Jamaican woman. And she'll be able to tell you what happened there and what is still happening there. And how these people who are Black like her supported that sort of... And do you know, by the way, that she said that all of the Black wealth that was sold off to a white person from Texas for little and nothing. And she said that the Jamaican black people wanted to rebuy and would have paid the government more money to buy up the debt, but the government decided that it would have a white Texan to come and buy it for little and nothing. So that is to tell you that the Caribbean, the leaders in the Caribbean, do not respect black wealth. They don't respect black entrepreneurships or entrepreneurs. And we can't fool ourselves today thinking that they want a strong and robust black middle class, because they don't. And I'm using here black in the sense of dark skinned, right? They might not mind some, more mixed Indian, white, brown middle class. But when it comes on to having people of my hue being millionaires, entrepreneurs, no matter how bright you are, if you're from Harvard or from Oxford, they don't want it to happen unless you're playing the game, unless you're willing to play the game. Pedro Lamont is saying they said that to her face, he's asking the question. Now, careful with the color yet again. In Barbados, they give away the people's land for free to African Bank with a diabolical negotiation. Now, remember now that African Bank does not mean that African people own it. That's another thing, right? That the people who own that bank, Trevor, could be white people too, right? So coming from Africa does not mean anything, or coming from Jamaica or wherever they're coming from, because we know that white people are also in Africa and people of other ethnic groups. So that's what we have to understand. Africa is not owned by Africans. They like to talk about, and we need to discuss about the whole discussion in England now, where Afro-Caribbean versus Afro, the Africans in the UK. There's a strong discussion going on there now they're saying that the Africans in the UK do much better than Afro-Caribbean Afro-Caribbean people. So we need to have that discussion, and we must understand that Africa is not controlled by Africans, but by white people, the same elites that control us in our societies today. Then we have, my thing, Andrew, is that the corruption is among our own black wicked people at home, but they use African connections as a safe space. More corruption. I see what you're saying. Absolutely. And they all tell us, like the Mr. Patterson and PJ Patterson, that they belong to the African Union, and he has this institute at the University of the West Indies, and they associate themselves, you're correct, with this African Union and African, whatever movement, and they're Pan-Africanist, and that's why I don't believe in this Pan-Africanist thing. It's just a title. Many of them are not real. I'm not saying now that all of them aren't, because they're real Pan-Africanists and they're true, like Mr. Pereira, to what they preach. But the fact of the matter is that many of them are not. They just use Africa as a means, like Miss Mia Motley wearing her dashiki every day, and it doesn't mean anything. It does not mean anything, but it does give people in the global South the illusion that she's standing up for people of African descent. Right? When that is a representation, she does not really mean that she wants to stand up for anybody in Africa or the Caribbean, as a matter of fact. What a great conversation. What can we discuss tomorrow night? I think that we have spent quite a bit of time on this live. Unfortunately, even though the live was very active, the algorithm, as usual, decides that it's not going to send out the notifications to lots of people. That's why we're not seeing many more people coming into the live, because of the whatever the algorithm is doing. We hope very soon that the algorithm will lift its whatever it's doing, and allow the notifications to go across, because people want to participate, but if they don't get the notification, then they are not going to be able to participate. I think one day they will. Excellent conversation as usual. Thank you so much. And I thank you too, Trevor, and all of you online for elevating the conversation. Without you, I would not have been able to do it. Thank you so much. And tomorrow, what can we talk about? What do we want to talk about tomorrow? Somebody was asking about the gender issue. Will you want to talk about that? Do you want to talk about the crime and gangsterisms? Because we know we're facing it. Haiti is facing that, and the entire Caribbean. Right now, I understand that the UK wrote a very damning report on Trinidad and Tobago with their gang problems there. Over 180 or 50 gangs in Trinidad and Tobago that they were saying. An NGO group, Pan-Africans and Money, buys all of those groups. Absolutely. They just have all these titles and they're Pan-Africanist and they're NGOs and they're all of these names. And it means absolutely nothing. They're just there to talk and talk about the history of Africa and Africa this and Africa that. That cannot buy a piece of bread, or slice of bread, I should say. So tomorrow, can we talk about, what do we want to talk about tomorrow? I think this was a good topic, for the Caribbean, and it should, if the algorithm decides to send out the notifications and to replay the video, that it should be, it should go to people and people will receive it greatly, with great zest, as it were. So tomorrow we'll do another live conversation. Can we? Okay, so have a great night, and I will send out something for tomorrow. All the best to you. See you. Try to be here tomorrow, and we'll talk further. Ciao.